Hello, everyone. This is Jason, and I'm here again with my dear friends Allison and Lynn. And Allison wanted to do a thing because there's a guy by the name of Marc Andreessen who she's come across in her research over the many, many years. And he was just on the Joe Rogan podcast. And so Allison called me up. She's like, "We gotta talk about this." So, Allison, do you want to just do a quick intro about who is Marc Andreessen and why should we care?
Well, Marc Andreessen, he's a major venture capitalist in the Bay Area, and actually he helped develop the first mosaic graphical user interface, and is a major angel investor in the Web 3.0 space. And so I was really curious because he sort of identifies as like along the libertarian line. What he was going to be saying. And I think when I called you up, I didn't have a good understanding of how involved it was going to be. That was going to be a 3-hour podcast. Now I realize, people who watch our stuff, what the time commitment was. But I think it's really important to document not just what was actually said, because he traveled to Austin, where Rogan is based, and had this conversation, but the things that were not said. Because I think oftentimes, Lynn, you and I have realized over time, what is not said is often more revealing than what actually is said. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, and I think the fact that Rogan relocated from Los Angeles to Austin during the pandemic has a lot to do with some conversations that we've had previously around this sort of synthesis of the left, right, libertarian, crypto freedom discussion. And so for me to have, Andreessen, who is a very close affiliate with Peter Thiel, down with Rogan, and having these sort of what ended up largely, in my opinion, being sort of a non-conversation. It wasn't really very meaty about the major issues that are unfolding around reality, but that it was important. And I will say my work in the education space early on and around impact investing specifically, most people aren't looking at Marc Andreessen's wife. Her name is Laura Arrillaga Andreessen. And she actually helped establish the framework for social impact finance in the Bay Area. And she's a Stanford alum. She helped set it up at Stanford. She helped set up the Silicon Valley social venture partners. They were key players in 2 of the education pay for success schemes in Santa Clara County. And so it's really important to understand that this Web 3.0 is integrated with humans and behavior management and behavioral economics. And of course, none of that really came out in the talk. So that's what I wanted to talk about today.
Great. And so you watched the podcast, obviously. Alice or Lynn, did you get a chance to watch any of it?
I watched most of it, yes. And I think I concur with what Allison says. They skim the surface on the things that now are making their way to mainstream conversations about AI and Internet of Things. He used a lot of terms that you're finally hearing a lot of people talk about. But they didn't talk about the more important things, with Web3, what it really means for us, and that what he is doing, he acts like these are things that are just, it's just going to happen whether we like it or not. But really, he's a major driving force in it. And so they act like, oh, it's coming no matter what. But it's really, he's driving it. And so to not own that, I think is a big piece of it that's not being talked about.
Yeah, when I watched it, it seemed like there was a lot of things that weren't said that were kind of in between the lines. I don't know if you guys got that, but there was discussion about and we'll show some clips here in a bit, but there was some discussion about religion and moral codes of society. And how we've lost religion and we're lacking these moral codes. And then at one point, he suggests, well, maybe I'll do something about that, but it's real subtle. You had to kind of really listen for it, because he never actually comes out and says it, but it sounds like, the discussion of coding morality into society was there, but you really had to listen for it. So it's kind of like it seemed to me like he was holding back on something that's in his head. And even Rogan said something to that effect at some point.
I saw Billy Graham speak. I didn't see him speak, but I was watching a video of him before he died. It was late in his life when he was speaking to a group of Silicon Valley people, and Oracle and all of these major players were in the audience, and he was talking about something very similar. And here you've got a major evangelical leader looking to big tech and to Silicon Valley. Okay, what can you do about some very similar thing, like a moral code kind of sort of this imperative that we now, if we have the technology to do it, shouldn't we do it? But it's an interesting use of the language too, that coding, when you think about code of conduct and moral code and then now shifting to a computer code that would be helping us to be more morally upstanding. I don't know. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And again, he doesn't come out and say it, but Alison, you can, kind of fill us in on, what his position is and why that discussion might be relevant to people. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. I don't know.
I can hear you. You were breaking up a little bit, but we can hear you, but you were breaking up a little bit for us as well.
Right.
So.
Okay, so I'll just say that I've been doing a lot of research. I have a blog post that I keep hoping is going to come out in the next couple of days, but is looking at a paper that was prepared by the IEEE organization, like the International Electronics and Electrical Engineers Association. And they're the global people who create the standards. And, Marc Andreessen, as much as he's a venture capitalist, he was trained as an electrical engineer. Like that's his grounding. And he emphasized that in the interview multiple times, like, I know how these things work. Like right now we can conceptualize all the different parts of an iPhone down to the atoms. Like it's a very mechanical process. And so within this report, what they were actually coding and developing standards for were autonomous intelligent systems. Because what Web 3.0 is, what mixed reality is that the built environment becomes enmeshed with information and data, and the way that we interact with them is responsive. Like it's monitoring us, and then it's reacting to how we react to it. And so this whole paper that was, 300 pages long was essentially talking about how do we embed, quote, intelligence through coding into cultural constructs. Because it won't work if you don't, like the machine can't do anything you haven't told it. So what this is actually going to require is that we have some sort of consensus within communities of what are agreed upon acceptable or unacceptable behaviors, and that those all become coded and made computable. And then what's increasingly complex is that society is both in the material world where we live with our physical bodies, but then in these cyber worlds too, that are much more porous. So like is there going to be a Dallas Metro or a Philadelphia Metro or Denver Metro code of cultural acceptability that gets literally coded into the smart infrastructure of that environment? And for me, that conversation was never surfaced, which is, again, compelling because Rogan ostensibly decided to relocate to Texas for more freedom, freedom and liberty or what have you. And yet he chose to move to one of the locations that's under the greatest technological surveillance in the state. I mean, maybe Dallas, Houston, and Austin are competing, but literally it is a center for smart tech infrastructure. Now he lives out on the lake, so he's got his $14 million new house out on the lake. So maybe it doesn't bother him the way it would be if you were a homeless person who was put on ID 2020 with your laminated card and your QR code. But that is something that if you actually were having an ethical conversation, that would have been surfaced. Like literally Marc Andreessen's, I think it's A16Z is the name of his crypto fund. They just got, $4.5 billion doubled up on their investment in crypto and blockchain. If you had the guy who is like the lead investor in Web 3.0 in your city that is a Web 3.0 city, would you not ask that question? Like to me, it's either that he didn't do his homework or that there was a whole lot of talk about something that was a lot of hot air about things that are not terribly relevant, which in this case, I think a huge amount of time was spent about sentient AI, which did not incorporate anything about current algorithmic bias, oppressive uses of algorithms that aren't sentient. So that's sort of my take.
Yeah, what was interesting about that sentient AR, which did take up, it seemed it took up about at least a third of the interview, is that even Marc Andreessen wasn't even that interested in that topic. It seemed like Joe Rogan was really trying to push him, like, but what if it becomes conscious? And he was like, it's not going to become conscious. It's just it does anyway. So that it was kind of an uninteresting conversation that just went on forever. Where yeah, there's a lot of things that weren't discussed, but they were hinted on.
Well, wait, I would define sentient or sentient, however you say it, but because I think we need to define that so that people understand what we're talking about, humans versus machines, and so it's being able to feel and to sense, and they did talk about emotions. And the difference between us and AI. So anything else that you picked up on that?
Well, can I chime in a little bit, Lynn? Because I want to bring up the, oh gosh, what's the name? The little genie, the little math genie.
Yeah, reasoning mind, GENIE, the genie. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the reasoning mind. So back when we were, first doing our education work, they were talking about an EdTech, like an avatar, like a little helper for this. These were young kids, like elementary school, right? And you would have this personalized learning program that would have a little genie avatar that would pop up and give you hints. And, it was a bot. And within the context of this conversation, what Andreessen was saying was that it's not going to become sentient, but it could become very accurate in how it mirrors human behavior. And it actually could trick people. And I think the tricky part is important. In his case, he talked about like men getting entangled in relationships with sex chatbots or something like that.
That was where they were the most vulnerable. Right, because they were wanting
when they were playing on your emotion, that they were very good at manipulating emotion. So that's one category, but then you start putting these little avatars with 8-year-olds, and that you have cameras that can sense their emotions, and this is part of the social emotional learning, their frustration, their biometrics, and then you start having quote unquote like friendships with your little cartoon, right? And the kids don't have enough sophistication of adults to really understand that fully. And that the children, I think at the time, like maybe when the program was discontinued, like they felt a void when they didn't have access to that chatbot anymore. And then that is a profit center. That's a profit center for these tech companies that are being developed. And so even as they have these moral discussions, the two of them spent a lot of time about morality and culture. They didn't really bring forward the ethical questions that are surrounding the products that they're making and investing in. They weren't having those conversations. And very little of the conversation included situating the technology sector in Web 3.0 in the military and in behavioral psychology and literal Tavistock MK Ultra, which you would think someone, and I don't really watch Rogan, but I kind of get the sense that he's somebody who's like supposed to be an outsider and talking about those things. None of that came up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Alison, does it almost give you the sense that they want to create a level of fear and anxiety about what's to come, and then the that resonance of fear that you've talked about is necessary on the left and the right. It keeps us divided. It elevates the emotions of the public, and then but it also helps feed that brain, that global brain, more. Does that make sense? That's just something that I kind of picked up on, is that they may not, whether they know it or not, that's what they're doing by talking about these things. Because when I was looking at the other YouTube videos where some have taken this interview and then they try and dissect it too, like there was one that had it was kind of for shock value, but it said let me see if I can find it here. It was it says something like it will shock you, what was said next. I mean, it's one of those. And it actually
this interview that shocking. I felt like they had certain agendas, but I didn't find this particular interview like trying to pull those strings. I felt very strongly, we can talk about this more later, like the nuclear energy stuff was clearly an agenda that was being pushed. I think that the sentient AI was being pushed in lieu of talking about like smart infrastructure and mixed reality, which would have been the perfect thing to talk about in Austin. And then that was the fact that that was not talked about at all is really significant. So they had to use AI to cover that. Like, we're not actually going to talk about impact investing in Austin and anything local. We're just going to keep it really high level. And at that point, there really wasn't even anything people could add into it. I think the opening, I thought the interest, the history, the way they put, because I had to go back at the beginning to listen to see how he introduced Andreessen, because he's both an engineer, a coding engineer and a venture capitalist. He didn't actually mention him being a venture capitalist. When I went back and listened, he's like, "Oh, you're the OG tech guy." So he was situating Mark within a historical context of like a pioneer coder, which again is like within the manifest destiny. Like, that was the identity he gave to him, not as someone who was building a new economic system, but as a someone who was embedded in the history of the development of interactive media. And I think the graphics connection, the graphical interface is really key, because that's the mixed reality. But I'm curious if you guys caught this in the beginning. He mentioned something called Plato, which was early EdTech, because Andreessen was trained at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And I actually visited there on my way back from South Dakota in the summer of 2020, and I saged the Plato building because it was early EdTech, not for kids, but more for people in prison or distance learning. And there was a book that he mentioned. He got the title a bit wrong, but it was called The Friendly Orange Glow. And it's quite an interesting book, actually, because the crux of it was that the technology that was available to the coders who had really unlimited access to these labs to develop, for, at the time, really cutting edge interactive technologies, they loved it. Like, they created the first chat groups. They created the first emails. They created the first games. The coding people who were on the inside thought it was the most amazing thing. But the people in prison who had to use the software and be consumers of it and who had no control over the system hated it. And so even back in the 60s, they were selling EdTech as, this is a wonderful solution, because, people who are incarcerated, they could be very smart, but they're embarrassed in a group because they'll be ostracized by their peers. So EdTech is just the perfect way to get at those people and really help them with personalized learning. And so that's, that history is important. I don't know. Can you see me? It looks like I've maybe frozen again.
We can see you and we can hear you. You're chopping up a little bit, but everything's fine. Oh, you froze up.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just frozen on my screen. Anyway, so
Alison, we'll let you know if there's an issue on our end, a major issue. Just keep rolling.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So anyway, so Plato, I think, is really important, and the fact he opened, and this is the opening of the whole interview. He's like, that cursor that said, "Are you ready?" Blink, blink, blink. Are you ready? We're going to invite you into a new world. You can be the creator. You'll be the creator of this world. Now, again, that's not the people who were the prisoners. They weren't coding. It was the people in the labs at Urbana-Champaign. But I think within the context of the Mormon transhumanist event that we attended in March, and the fact that Tamika Tilleman, who was the keynote, worked for Andreessen Horowitz, this notion that we are a creator of our destiny, and that sales pitch is something they really want us to internalize, as if we are the ones in control of the game. And that's a lie.
And I actually have that, one of those things that they gave us at that event, that I have it right here in my book. But yeah, it was something about, what are you going to create, was their the image that they had on I can't find it. I thought it was in here, but it was their graphic with the didn't it have two planes? Coming from both sides, and then it says, what will you create? And it's it's no coincidence.
It's interesting too. You mentioned that they left out the fact that he was a venture capitalist, and I think about the History Channel did a series called "The Men Who Built America," and it was a series all about basically these capitalists who didn't build anything, but we're given the privilege of borrowing money in order to finance and have decision-making power over everything. And but it's an interesting idea there that we associate these people as being inventors and creators when there's something else that's going on that just has to do with finance and power, not necessarily the creation of it. Bill Gates is another great example of that, or Elon Musk, for example. These people that are being set up as the creators of it are nothing of the sort. Anyways, just a side.
Well, and they spent a good amount of time talking about AI art too, like those programs that make AI, and they didn't really weigh in strongly if they thought it was wonderful or not. But like that's sort of the level at which it's sort of just aggregation of images and mashups of things. Like that's what the AI is doing at that point. But they didn't really say it was lame or dumb, but they also didn't really embrace it as true art either. So it's just stuff. And I feel like, this sort of moves into like the section that they were talking about after the AI, and the sentient AI, which dragged on for much longer than it needed to. But about the religion, Jason, that you mentioned, and belonging and groups, and that what you create and what you consume is really central to your identity these days in this information economy that's being built. And that your belongingness really depends on like if you're an influencer, or if you're not an influencer, what influencers' products you consume. And that's the new way of being. I mean, it's like, sure, people still, have branded clothing and, various things to self-identify themselves. And, now you've got these NFTs and things. But I really feel like the content in the information economy being baked into our belonging online is becoming really problematic and dumbing a lot of people down and creating silos that don't need to be there.
So I did put a bunch of clips together that we can maybe show and then talk a little bit about. And I know Lynn can only stay with us for so long. So we'll see how far we get here. But I thought, Alison, should I start with the reality privilege clip? Do you think that would be a good?
Oh yeah, that's great.
I went ahead and queued that up. You guys will not see the video, but you'll be able to hear it. So yeah, we'll just show a few clips and then and talk about them. But this is a clip that Alison had pulled from, I don't know if it was at a TED Talk or some kind of talk from several years ago, I think. I'm not sure when this was, but anyways.
So, as a sitting Facebook director, I politely declined to answer. But let me generalize out. So this is something the one hears about the internet, a variation on this. The one hears about the internet a lot. So we start by saying that gentleman, I'm sure he's doing fantastic work, and he clearly means well. I really, really deeply disagree with everything he just said, and the reason is because, not just because I had some role in creating the whole thing, but a friend of mine named Bo Cronin, who works in VR and is an advanced thinker on these things, has a term he uses called reality privilege. And so it's the view from the box seats. It's the view from it's a view from places in the world. That's exactly the kind of view you get from places in the world in which there are super rich real world experiences to have, right? And so you grow up in an upper middle class community, probably on the coast. You have these incredible schools. You have these incredible enriched activities. You have all these after school activities you should do. You've got all these incredible people to talk to. You go to a college campus. You get to hang out with all these incredible super geniuses. For the 0.0001% of the population of the world who gets to do all those things, then this internet thing is a big step down. For everybody else, the internet is a giant step up, right? Most people don't have that level of reality privilege. Like most people grow up in places where there's a much higher level of what you might call intellectual deprivation. There's just not that many people around to talk to. There's just not that many interesting things being discussed. There's not that many great experiences to have. It's hard to learn new things. The schools aren't good. I mean, most kids in the world don't even go to school, or go to school up to the grade 4, grade 6, or grade 8. It just can't progress beyond that point because there's nothing locally, there's just no local system infrastructure or community to be able to engage on ideas. And so the internet represents a giant level up on all those topics for most of the world. And I think it's a fantastic thing.
All right, okay, well then, fine, Snapchat for everybody.
I still love that woman. All right, Snapchat for everyone.
This triggers me. I have to say, in thinking about all the activism that Alison and I engaged in over the last, however 6 years since we met, I know that I advocated for real field trips because I'd run for school board in 2017, and my opponent was talking about virtual field trips. And
look, it's just going to keep spreading. Like there's a concept in computer science.
I agree. It's going to keep spreading.
Sorry, I didn't mean for that to start up there. My bad.
Spreading like a cancer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but in us exploring what this means with artificial intelligence, and we knew that the austerity budgets in the public schools were there. That was all imposed on purpose to break the system, to collapse it, to then have a lot of this technology replace the teacher. But this whole idea of reality privilege it's that creating that misery, and then you're ushering in the solution, which is more augmented reality. And you've got people who, and I used to, when I was advocating for the real field trips, I say, you have kids who live in an apartment and that's all they see. And some of them don't even have a playground in there. So they basically go from there to school, back home to school. They don't go outside of their apartment complex. They don't see the city. They don't have those experiences where you can see and smell and touch and feel. And then they would sandbag because of the high stakes testing. They would sandbag the field trips at the end of the year. So they were really not having any true enrichment throughout the year. In May, when testing was over, then they go, oh gosh, we got to check the zoo box, and we've got to check the, this box. And so they might do a real field trip, but then especially during the pandemic, so much of that was eliminated, or they didn't go to school at all and didn't have any kind of stimulation outside. So his what he's saying is a real issue. I mean, if you live in a community where your kids can go out and play, they talk a lot about the digital divide, and the New York Times had an opinion piece on the real digital divide is kids in poor communities who the parents don't think they're safe. They will put them inside on a device on video games and whatnot. Whereas the kids in safe communities, their kids can run around and play, ride their bikes, have fresh air, do all the things that build their dendrites. And that's a legit thing, a reality privilege, but it's with a nefarious agenda behind it. to create this this Web 3.0, this digital twinning, and all the things that Alison has been trying to sound the alarms on, that people are just they won't go there. They're not really talking about what that looks like. Okay, sorry, I'll quit talking.
Look, it's just going to keep spreading. Like so, there's a concept in computer science called Metcalfe's law, and the basically
it's just set to trigger. Sorry about that. I'm trying to do this, but it's not behaving. I turned off automatically.
We're human. We're still figuring stuff out.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Your
Alison.
reality privilege is showing,
yeah,
Jason.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, you've got these two many times over millionaires sitting in a studio in like outside of Austin with this in the background, not said, right? The reality privilege frame was not provided in this interview. Like, you wouldn't know that that's the basis of Marc Andreessen's personal morality and his business interests. That didn't come out. Like, there was nothing about that. And so in the last 10 minutes was the only time in which Rogan really pushed to be like, oh, well, what is your investing outlook? Like, what frames you? He was trying to kind of get he was trying to push it into crypto, which Andreessen wasn't going to go there. But essentially what Andreessen said was, we're not day traders. Like, we invest for the long run. We find our focus is disruptive technologies, game changing, not just a little bit, like not a tweak on an existing tech, but fundamentally new technologies that have like a 15 or more year time horizon, where we put our angel investing money in and lock it in for a decade and help those companies, right? And so that was in the last 10 minutes. Now, would the interview have been much more interesting had that been front-ended? Right? Okay, if you are a long-term tech investor, what technologies are you putting your money behind? And maybe there was a bit of a hat tip around Web 3.0 once or twice, but nothing in depth about what this future is. And if you don't think that they're doubling up on their blockchain investments because they know about the Japan moonshot goal 1 that we're supposed to live as holograms, you're naive.
Genuine.
If anybody out there knows about living as a hologram, it's going to be Marc Andreessen. And yet they will sit there and talk about moralizing things and talk about like vaping or, just random stuff that's irrelevant largely, and obscure the much bigger conversations. And that's what I have no patience for, Lynn. I mean, we know this. You've been in these, at the Capitol trying to get the people who are ostensibly the experts to say it out loud in public, and they simply won't.
Yeah, and we had a whole commission created after a bill was passed on blockchain to study. It's a work group to study blockchain and how they can expand it. And we all these moms showed up at the Capitol saying, we can study what's already in existence. We don't need to create. I mean, we don't need to pretend, or we don't in any kind of presentation that acts like or gives the illusion that somehow we need to look into this. We're already doing it. Study what's already there, and we can tell you the pitfalls and the flaws in it. But they go through the motions.
Yeah. So I thought I'd use some of my reality privilege here, and
control the situation, Jason. You're
when I heard
bossy.
When I heard that reality privilege too, like for me personally, like the one thing that I love to do is just to go camping, and it's just like, that's reality privilege, just go,
I would argue that
you've got to live on the internet.
That's what we have. I don't.
But that was one of the things when Raul did a piece about blockchain when we were in Austin last fall, and it was Flowbird, I think, was the company, and it was connected to smart technologies and parking. Mm-hmm. But it went to the point of apps at the municipal parks in Austin. So again, it's not quite the same as camping, but there's a lot of public, like state parks, where access is going to be tied to your digital identity, and you're going to be tracked as far as usage of public amenities, and you're privileged to access those. And none of that, like, again, these apps, what Andreessen talks about, and it's a bit frustrating later on, is about like woke culture, right? Because that's Rogan's thing, right? And yeah, it's annoying, but they want to pretend like social justice, climate, blah, 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 isn't an impact market. Like they want to pretend like it's just emotional people who are doing it, not that this isn't market shaping for these new apps and products, which is exactly what Andreessen's backing.
Yeah. So, yeah, funny you mentioned that because I attended Smart Cities Week here a few weeks ago in Denver, and there was someone that was giving a presentation on, parking management within the larger, within a city, and having sensors and we know this parking spot's open, and then you can pull up and you won't even have to do anything because we already know who you are, and we'll automatically dock your dock your credits or whatever. And I raised my hand. I'm like, hey, so like, what if somebody doesn't have a smartphone, or like someone wants to opt out? And you have to have the app, by the way. And we all know when you put an app, like I don't like putting many apps on my phone. I already have too many that I don't want, really, because of the terms and conditions. So they're basically forcing you to agree to terms and conditions that are within these apps just to park your car. Or like you said, Alison, just to go into the park. I mean, they're already doing it with games. I know someone who tried to go to a baseball game the other day, and they had money. They couldn't buy a ticket. They said, no, you have to do it on your phone. They said, well, I don't want to do that. And so it's not just using your phone, just like the digital ID. It's not just the convenience of having your ID on your phone. It's surveillance, and it's terms and conditions, and no one talks about that.
Well, and I have a concrete example of this. So I was actually going to Fort Worth to talk about blockchain, and I get to the parking lot. I'm running late, and they've got the whole QR code thing, which I reject. And so in order to park, I had to do the QR code. So I didn't do it. I was fully, willing to pay. So I went in without paying, and because I wouldn't do the QR code, and then I got a ticket on my car with a QR code to pay the ticket. And so I actually, there was a number on there to call. So I thought, okay, I'm going to use the human being, talk to a live person, and justify their position. So I called her and I said, look, I don't do QR codes. So can I just pay you whatever the price of the parking and the ticket? And she said, oh, sure. And I told her why I reject the QR code so I can protect her job.
Yeah, that's funny.
But yeah, I mean, you're walled off if you don't jump through their hoops and conditions and terms. Then you'll be walled off, and you will not be able to participate. So it's fine when you're talking about entertainment. Okay, I can live without a concert. I can live without parking maybe, but I can't live without other things like food and what if the only way to pay our mortgage or our rent is through these systems? Then what? Yeah. We have to have a proxy, or we are booted out of the system.
But there's choice there's choice, Lynn.
Right.
So yeah, the illusion of choice. Mm-hmm. So why don't we start going through some of these clips? Most of them are pretty short. And then we'll show them, and then maybe we discuss a little bit, show another one. So why don't we do that? And
thank you for putting those together, Jason.
You're welcome.
Look, it's just going to keep spreading. Like, so there's a concept in computer science called Metcalfe's law, and that basically expresses the power of a network mathematically. The formula is x squared, and x squared is the formula that gets you the classic exponential curve, the curve that arcs, kind of up as it goes. And that's a process. That's basically an expression of the value of a network is all of the different possible connections between all of the nodes, which is x squared. And so quite literally, like every additional person you add to the network doubles the potential value of the network to everybody who's on the network. And so every time you plug in a new user, every time you plug in a new app, every time you plug in a new, anything, sensor into the thing, a robot into the thing, like whatever it is, the whole network gets more powerful for everybody who's on it. And the resources at people's fingertips, get bigger and bigger. And so, this thing is giving people like really profound superpowers in like a very real way.
Holy shit.
Right. And so it's just going to get, because the internet's going to get wired into everything, right? Every car, right? Everything, every door, everything's going to have a chip. Everything's going to be connected to the network. Like the whole world is going to get like smart and connected in a very different way.
And I'll just real quick reiterate when the smart doesn't mean intelligent, it means self-monitoring and reporting technology. So when he says that, everyone's going to be surveilled is what he's saying. And
Right.
everything
Yeah.
is going to be surveilled.
And he's going to be the,
Well, and
the leader and driver. One of the, yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say the imperative of no one left behind, right? I mean, if you use the lens of whatever the law that he said, everyone, like every edition magnifies, but they're framing it as empowerment or capacity as opposed to totalitarian domination, right? I mean, there's two different ways you could tell that story, and one is through the lens of full spectrum dominance of the natural world, and one is of unlimited economic value creation for people who are running free market enterprise, which is sort of where his frame is coming from. But it's strange that he mentioned too. I was just going to say, just briefly, I've had a number of people reach out to me, over the year or so who are targeted by technologies, targeted by remote, experimentation of these networked systems that they want to ultimately have integrated in terms of biodigital convergence. And so, what one person might imagine as a superpower, another person might imagine as a constant torture device, and there were several times in the conversation in terms of the separation of mind and body, because Rogan kept sort of pushing like mind uploads and, cyborgs and, these different things. And, Andreessen kept pulling it back to say, like, actually the mind and the body, there are very direct biochemical connections, a lot of them happening through your vagus nerve and your gastrointestinal stuff and your microbiomes. Like, there is something about your physical body that shapes how your consciousness works. And so, I feel like it's disturbing when they have the conversations about the level of integration they're talking about with technology and bodies, that we're not in control, but you can see how they're trying to frame it as a communal good. Like that, this is part of what I'm writing in the piece I'm working on, is that a cooperative, right? They're going to frame all of these network nodes as cooperatives. We're all cooperating, but what the heck are we cooperating with? I don't think it's human.
Well, and so much of it is done through the equity lens, is what they always talk about in our school districts and in our cities, and equity scoring. And so I think, framing this as though it will, and like what happened at the Mormon Transhumanism Conference. So much of it comes as they pitch it as this will make things more equitable. This will level the playing field. This will equalize other countries with, like what they did with Cardano, equalizing Ethiopia with America, and giving everyone agency, and through blockchain technologies, and through voting and the ledger that they put everybody on, blockchaining all children, 5 million children in Ethiopia, then to be scaled to 100 million people in the country, saying you will get to vote and you will have equal footing with other countries. That is a huge part of that was a huge part of the justification behind the Mormon Transhumanism Conference, is that, we should do this because this is what God would want. He gave us the technology to be able to touch every single person, to connect every single person, to give every single, no person left behind, no child left behind, no one left behind. Everyone is connected to the system. And Andreessen, when he talks about this as though it's okay, yeah, right now we're still in kind of that weird middle stage where, or how did he phrase it? It was like, well, we're kind of still in the real world and we're kind of in this virtual world, and we still have physical, what did he use as the example? I can't remember when he was talking. But anyway, I mean, we're still in the real world, but we're in transition. And so you're seeing a mix of the two. And then eventually it's going to be 100%. And when he says it with such confidence that this is going to happen. This will be. It's not, maybe it's this imperative. I mean, we will we have to comply to this. I mean, or comply with this. This is a done deal in his mind. But that's why we're doing this video right now, because we don't have to. And this Benjamin Gears over here is leading the charge to be that roadblock, to maybe say, hey, well, hold up, we're not there yet. And that's the encouragement I give people when I do go on these talks, like the one in Fort Worth. I said, we are not blockchained completely yet. We are not fully immersed in this system yet. We still have, there's still hope and there's still opportunity for us to thwart these plans if enough people understand what it is. And I was thinking about Joe Rogan. So he had a show where there's a woman, a friend of mine, who's running for county judge in Dallas, and he had her on the show. And in fact, I think I'm going to tweet him about this. But what her role would be as the county judge is the smart city stuff comes in through that position, and you'll see that there's different municipalities across the country who, whether it's your school district or your city council or your commissioner's court, but they are reviewing these contracts. They are approving the contracts for the smart cities deals, and they'll come in through public-private partnerships. A lot of this technology and the infrastructure being laid, I mean, what it looks like to the local resident is it's a memorandum of understanding. It's a data sharing agreement. It's a contract with a nonprofit that says, oh, it's not going to cost you anything, but here we're going to put in these smart sensors in sidewalk labs, or smart sensor technology in streetlights. And we're going to have these, your police, these cell towers and things that will share information in real time. So if there's an active shooter in your school, that information is being shared in real time so they can see. So I think it's important for people to understand, well, like, what does it look like? How is it that we do stop this stuff? And it comes in at the local level through. So maybe Rogan, I don't know, maybe he'll see that. And when he hosted Lauren Davis, I've been trying to help her understand, since she's running for this seat in November. She needs to understand all this stuff comes through her. She would be the CEO of the county. And if she knows this, then she can be that roadblock on this stuff.
Can I say one thing about the public-private partnership? Because I think that's really important for the libertarian frame, which I think both Rogan and Andreessen, Andreessen described himself as a sort of a soft libertarian in that frame. But also they were talking about corporate culture and this is what Andreessen was saying about grooming corporate culture. And towards the latter half of the podcast, he was pushing back against wokeism in corporate culture and like uplifting. And I think they actually had put a lot of money into Coinbase. Andreessen Horowitz, like the Coinbase CEO said, like, enough with politics in the workplace. We're not doing this anymore. Like, if you want to do this, we'll give you a severance package, nice, and just go away. And so that the people who come in will be acclimatized to that corporate culture, which increasingly Andreessen has said is remote work, because they're invested in all the remote work companies, right? And instead of putting their money into real estate, they're putting it into sending their people to resorts so that they can bond and have their own communal culture. But the challenge is that, okay, so they're developing, the blockchain folks, the apps and the sensor technologies that will allow private interests, private corporations, for their own profit through these public-private partnerships to control the environment that the masses exist in. And then you've used the woke thing, which is very popular to bash woke people. And I'm not like into the wokeness, but you use that. That's how they can pick this up and go, well, see, you don't want to be woke. But then now all the people working for the tech app companies, you're literally helping build the digital prison. But you're supposed to come to work and log in on whatever Teams or what have you and build the digital prison and not be political. Like that was Andreessen's line, was work can't be political. And yet it's misunderstanding in a fundamental way the way these companies are remaking the entire world into a surveillance dragnet. But they use the woke thing now to say, like, but that's off limits. We're not actually, you can't talk about anything that matters. You're just supposed to build the product, which, yeah, sure. That's their right as a corporation to do that or to make that expectation. But once the public-private partnership contracts allow those technologies to rule the public sphere with no accountability, right? Like once the government signs off on the contract, you can't get control of that back.
Right.
So it's a very complex conversation and very nuanced and complex. And I feel like the polarization is used to like make it impossible to have the conversation.
True. Because you're either on the woke side or the anti-woke side. So there's no discussion. I mean, everybody just shuts down. You're either on this side or that side. It creates that constant wedge and that dialectic that keeps the divide there. And then meanwhile, the Andreessens of the world can move to the next level, and then we can bring in the next thing.
Level up.
Build this. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned something earlier too that I think is really important, Lynn, which is that underneath that, some of the things that are said are actually important issues. There are embedded within this thing that they're promoting are real concerns and real problems that actually really need to be addressed. And I think that throws people off guard because they're like, oh yeah, I care about that issue. I care about this issue. And they don't really see the larger thing and see how that's actually kind of in many ways just a marketing thing for other things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I need to, so I don't know, like a little warning popped up when I played that video. So I'm going to try to play the next video in the window. There's a chance I mean, who knows, maybe they'll shut us down or whatnot. I don't know. Do you guys want to try to play another video? I'll play it up in the little corner here though. Maybe that'll help their algorithms. By the way, what we're doing here is 100% fair use. It's that we have fair use laws that allow you to show copyrighted material in order to critique it, or for educational purpose, or even for satire. Like that's been, it's part of our laws. So that's something that's really sick about what's going on, about, I've talked a lot about property, but that's this whole thing of like, this is my property. You can't even talk about it. You can't even reference this and actually have a discussion about it. Although legally you can, but we have we're discussing this on authoritarian platform, which is Google, which is YouTube. So they pretty much do whatever they want. They're kind of above the law. Like people complain, like, "Hey, this actually is fair use." And YouTube has deleted videos of mine and that's claimed under dubious and false claims. So anyways, I just thought I'd point that out here. But let's try to play another clip up. I'll try this one up in the little corner here and see if that makes a difference. We'll see what happens. I'll keep an eye on it. Hopefully we don't get shut down here.
We have no idea. We don't know how human consciousness works. Like we have no idea how the brain works. We have no idea how to we have no idea how to do any of this stuff on people. The most advanced form of medical science that understands consciousness is actually anesthesiology, because they know how to turn it off. Right? They know how to click, power off, and then they know how to power back on, which is also very important. But
Right.
they have no idea what's happening inside the black box, and we have no idea. Nobody has any idea. So this is a parallel line of technological development that's not actually recreating the human brain. It's doing something different. It's basically training computers on how to understand, process, and then reflect back the real world. It's very valuable work because it's going to make computers a lot more useful. For example, self-driving cars. This is the same kind of work that makes a self-driving car work.
Yeah.
Right? So this is very valuable work. It will create these programs that will be able to trick people very effectively. Right. And so there, for example, here's what I would be worried about, which is basically like what percentage of people that we follow on Twitter are even real people?
Okay, we'll stop there. So I'm going to try to not do them quite as long as maybe we can skirt by here. We're good so far. All right. So that was the beginning part where they were talking about AI, computers, sentient. Thoughts on that clip, you guys?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I did that podcast on the airline industry and the Great Reset, which was a little too much focused on Klaus Schwab, which we understand now that it's not just one big bad dude, some Dr. Evil. It's a network of people implementing this global brain. And so what the self-driving cars and what he's talking about is he's he's talking about it learning us, and so that it's not necessarily, I mean, the way that what they're doing in the airline industry is it's learning the pilots, and then it will eventually replace them with what do they call it? The aircraft that's pilotless aircraft. So they've gone from five to two, and then eventually, I mean, I think a lot of what we're seeing in the airline industry with all the crisis, and same in the schools, is that you create the crisis, you have the shortage, and then we'll have the solution will be, well, if you want to go to the wine country, you're going to have a pilotless aircraft, and people will go, okay, well, I guess that's my only way to get there, then I will be okay with that. So are we okay with not having people manning the aircraft? The self-driving cars, it has to learn us in order to bring in this new system. So I don't know. What do you say to that, Alison? We've talked about this quite a bit.
Well, I mean, for me, I sort of feel like the missing piece is the twinning, in that conversation. It learns us. So to be useful, right? That's what he's saying. Like, oh, the system is going to learn us to make itself more useful to us. But in that, it means that everything has to be run through a simulation. And later on in the podcast around the climate stuff, Andreessen raises some questions about the accuracy of the simulation and modeling around climate anyway. And so it seems like he's not totally on board that the simulation is everything. And yet this idea that it will learn us and that will be of assistance, that has everything to do with the personalized learning program, Lynn, too. I mean, the cognitive model of the children, right? It will learn the children to better steer them into the proper behavior. And this is somewhat related, but I want to make sure that I don't miss saying it. There was a section in there with Rogan a couple of times, because I guess his background, I don't know to what extent he also promotes sort of wellness stuff based on his past athleticism or what have you, but he was talking a lot about body positive. Like they had this sort of random discussion about obesity and weight and who's in control of creating visuals or social norms. And, it's kind of silly because Andreessen's like, no, like they have marketing people that decide that, like that serves power. Like Andreessen's like, no, like the ideas around body image are serving power. And Rogan's like, no, it's just, people who, aren't as fit want to have the magazines look like them. And Andreessen's like, no, dude, it's like, it's happening a certain way. And yet, and then it goes off into like, people should do bodybuilding or people should take care of themselves better. And it went into sort of the mindfulness or the spirituality. You should have these practices. And I can see within the simulation zone and impact investing, those twins, like knowing you and then putting you on self-improvement pathways, is really a huge part of the social impact finance space. That's the social prescribing. But again, none of this gets surfaced either by Andreessen or Rogan, that they're going to build markets in behavior management and that they are incentivized to create unhealthy environments, both through environmental toxicity, magnetic frequency toxicity, economic issues around lack of food access, economic stressors that are going to come with all this automation that will make people fundamentally be more susceptible to chronic illness. Like Rogan seemed to be all in on like personal responsibility for being fit and active and well-adjusted and, whatever. And like, I can see that would totally connect with like, if not him directly, like his wellness guests, like these whole alternative wellness people who are part of the resistance that are going to be baked into this body image and mindfulness sphere too. So anyway, I thought that was a bit of an odd conversation for them to have. The dynamic was weird, but I think, again, I don't know how much of these shows are actually scripted, so that they're trying to drop normalizing story frames in so that they'll loop around in future shows and draw it out more.
Yeah, so maybe we'll show another clip. We seem to have gotten away with that one. This Us Outlaws. Okay, let's do this.
My view is the universe is uncaring.
Yeah.
Right. Like
exactly.
Yeah.
I think so too.
The universe does not give a shit.
Right. So good or bad, like it's only.
I think it's all.
It's relative in our neighborhood.
But yeah. But I think therefore it's. I mean, to me that's a simple question answer. Is it's all in only through our eyes.
Right.
We're the only thing that matters because the universe really doesn't care.
Right.
By the way, Mother Nature doesn't care. Like nobody cares. Nobody
Right.
cares but us. And so we get the privilege, but we also get the burden of being the ones who have to define the standards.
Yeah.
That we have to set the rules. And of course, the project of human civilization is trying to figure out how to do that. My view is
So I thought that was kind of an
That's just like Kevin. That's just like Kevin Werbach. Be the game designer.
Yeah. And Mother Nature doesn't care. All the wildlife that's destroyed doesn't care. I mean, I don't know. It's just an interesting way to look at the world. That's very different than the way I look at the world. But I mean, as far as the universal consciousness or whatever, like New Age stuff or whatever. Oh, the universe is looking out for me. I don't know anything about that, but like that mentality that he has, it clearly sets himself up as being some kind of like almost godlike figure.
Yeah. Because I think it more is that, okay, it doesn't care about you, but we can code us to care about things. It's sort of like a forced moral code. And I think with the this movement that is an interfaith, all faiths blend into one, and then that moral, whatever it is that is deemed to be morally, however you're supposed to behave or whatever you're supposed to believe, that with this collective mind is that you can then mandate, you can make it a compulsory sort of thing where you're not really allowed to believe this from your chosen faith or whatever you've been raised in. You have to then believe in the global. You have to accept and adopt whatever it nudges you towards. Anyone who doesn't subscribe to that will then be forced out. There won't really be any free will or free thought.
Do you remember the guy from the Mormon Transhumanist Association conference, the religion as API?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Like you could just port in the religion, like whatever. Like you could be whatever, Jewish, and port in the Buddhist app. Just plug in your app.
So I was up late last night, and then I started the render process, and I didn't have time to go through the clips and name them so I would know what clip is what. And I have quite a few clips, so let's just run through them because there's some better ones towards the end, but I just don't remember where they're at. But we'll just run through these, and hopefully we'll get to the other ones that because there's a few that I think are really, really relevant. And I was just grabbing pieces that I thought might be good for discussion. But so yeah, let's here's another one.
Universe is uncaring.
Oh, we did that one already.
But I would say too, like on that, he's an engineer. Like he literally is the engineer. Like that's his mindset. And so that's very different from people who have a different faith practice or like an animist worldview, right? Like there is a very different approach in the technology space, in this techno-optimism, that the humans are the ones who know the stuff, even though many times Andreessen says they don't really know. But there's an assertion that like, even though they really don't know much, they know more than other people, so they should be the ones in charge. And to me, like that's so counter to like Robin Wall Kimmerer's thing. It's like, man, we're the younger siblings. We tend to mess things up. Like sit back, chill, like watch the Mother Nature, watch the world because you don't want to mess it up.
Yeah. Also, too, when he talked about like coming up with a new code, he would use the word "we," and a lot of people listening to that might think, "Oh, we as a community, we need to come up with a better way to organize ourselves or whatever." But when he's talking about "we," he's talking about this handful of powerful. Yeah, it means him and his cronies. It doesn't mean us. we
don't have a seat at that table because we would say no, we do not consent. But they are, it's not a lot of. I mean, it's really a handful of men like him who are doing this, and they're they're quite enamored with each other, and they love to have their gatherings in places like where is that, Allison? That Powder, was it Powder Mountain?
Powder Mountain.
Alta. Oh.
And Alta.
Yeah.
They've been doing
Yeah.
it a long time.
Well, I would just say too.
Well,
Oh, go ahead.
And go wee
beautiful
all the way
natural
home.
setting.
Yeah. Well, the thing
Beautiful
is,
natural
though, it's
settings.
about belonging.
Mhm.
Yeah, natural. Yeah. But I think that they've been very strategic in creating a cult of crypto. Like they talk a lot about religions and cults and standards and belonging and setting ground rules. And they've pitched a pretty wide net of people who have signed on to digital gold. Like they think it's money, and it's not. Like that's what I keep trying to emphasize. What we're dealing with in Web 3.0, it's not money as you like you actually understand it. It's script, it's rights, it's Jason's, freedom tokens. It's your ability to engage in the world. It's so much bigger than this idea of people trying to limit it to a crypto versus a fiat currency conversation. And
Yeah.
I'll just take this so I don't forget. But there have been two different. I've been reflecting on interviews that I've done the past couple of years. And Jason, I really appreciate you facilitating us to be able to have these conversations, because as the course of this quote unquote resistance has rolled out, it's become more and more clear to me that there are divisions, and that ultimately these calls for unity with people who are asserting crypto or blockchain smart contracts be part of the world that they're building, like that is a very distinct difference. And if you believe that you're fighting whatever injections or bio health passports or something, and that's the quest, but you're okay with living in a smart contract world or a world of soul bound tokens, like that's a huge problem. And I would say, just like within Rogan, he has this huge platform because he's captured the attention of people. He's captured these eyeballs to be their storyteller, to have this reality be made. And then there are many, many smaller Joe Rogans. And, I will just point out two that I've had issues with recently. One is Greg Carlwood on the Higher Side Chats, who I gave 2 interviews to. And currently on Twitter, like he advertises his name, it was next to, at least, this week, ETH, Ethereum, that's smart contracts, that's soul-bound tokens. You can't ask for the truth and then not be willing to interrogate what mixed reality actually is and where it came from. And the same with Charles Eisenstein, and Leo Saraceno has been doing excellent work on with Raul at Silicon Icarus, digging into Cello as the programmable money in the humanitarian aid space, which is being sold by Charles Eisenstein. And literally they have wedded sacred economics and the gift economy to digital program money and calling it beautiful money. And so again, you've got a whole sector of creators, of digital influencers, who mostly have sort of branded themselves as outsiders, people who are going to tell you information the mainstream isn't. And yet they're not going to go to the place of saying, hey, do you want the children coming up behind you to live in a world that's governed by soul-bound tokens on Ethereum? No one's willing to deal with that reality, but that's exactly what Marc Andreessen's world is being built. And so, and the belongingness, and that's what they were very astute in their talking in this podcast about the need to belong, the sense of being unanchored from older systems, how the disruption of technology changing society that makes people want to find a group and follow the rules. And I can't tell you how many times people have said, well, we need unity. Like so-and-so is a nice person, therefore we should just not, like, just, it's a pass, or maybe they don't understand. That time is up, and I wish that people were making better choices. And that's not to say you can't go back and change your position, but, and it's hard because when you take the hard line, there's not lots of people signing up for your club. But,
no, and I think that's the biggest red flag.
The lunch table alone, if that's what it takes,
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we're not going to have the numbers, the reach that he has. And I would I'm assuming that if he did take this approach and did actually talk about soulbound tokens on Ethereum and what's really coming, then he would lose that following, or maybe he would be targeted to delete followers through Twitter or whatever medium, through Spotify. I don't know. I mean, that's just a
they're Swedish, by the way. I wasn't familiar with where Spotify was. It's $100 million deal in 2020, so recent. $100 million deal, and Spotify, both founders are out of Sweden. So that's total fourth industrial revolution, automation, Ericsson, like programmable money for refugees, all of that.
One, too, it's the interesting thing about like these leaders, influencers or whatever, which is funny. We've been called influencers, but we don't really have that much of a reach. But the influencers.
I can't even influence my own adult children.
Yeah,
so.
I'm the same way. I have friends and family that I've been trying. I'm like, don't you say what's going on? And they're like, Jason, get out of here.
Right.
But like these people that have a big reach, like someone like Joe Rogan, becomes someone that people look up to as a good source of information. But again, they're containing the discussion within this narrow framework about, like, say, perhaps he'll have a guest on about, or many guests on, that actually challenge some of the health narratives that are being pushed right now. And so people are so grateful for that, but they don't realize that he'll have someone like Marc Andreessen on, or other guests who are actually helping to lead and facilitate the end goal, the end game. And for some reason, people aren't getting the end game. It's like you're being led into a trap. And that's fine. You're so excited about winning this little battle, I don't know. It's really frustrating.
Oh, it's terribly frustrating because it's these. Well, even in the political, with these with the left-right groups, they tend to worship these people, and they'll have them as for their speaking engagements, and they want to draw in an audience, and so they'll have these visible, high-profile people who they say nothing. I mean, I show up to these things on both sides of the aisle just because I want to understand. And most of them they're such narcissists. They just run their mouths about themselves, especially the elected officials. And so I've been trying to tell people, have normal people. I have a podcast of my own. I have regular, everyday people doing what I view as extraordinary things, and not extraordinary in that they're, famous for it, but they are doing the work at the ground level. It's yeoman's work. It is, it's not, they don't get high notoriety and fame for it, but whether that's a social worker who is being walled off by the philanthropists and those nonprofits who are part of this network, who are going to impose all this crap. I try and find the real people doing the organic work and showcase what they're doing. And I don't care about reach and clicks and likes and all of that. I want to find those people and celebrate what they are doing. But so much of it's frustrating because I know. With people like Rogan, he has to continue to keep the listeners and the audience, those numbers up, because that feeds the, it draws in. I don't know how he's paid. I don't really care, but I do know that if you're in that system, like Alison has exposed, I don't know if it's Rockfin and all of those that pay you for your your listeners and your reach, then, you've got to keep that up. You have to keep bringing in those people that will draw a crowd. But those are the wrong, we need to be silencing and ignoring those like Gates or Andreessen or Elon Musk and his Neuralink and all. We need to ignore those people, because the more that they get a platform and the more they get the mic, then the it just people perceive them as being the intelligent ones, the powerful ones, the ones that we need to be listening to, they have some sort of crystal ball. They don't have a crystal ball. They're just creating the future that I say we don't want. I think we don't want.
And there's a discussion
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say there's kind of a discussion right now in the chat on YouTube about another show that's kind of like Joe Rogan. I won't even mention the name because I don't want to promote it. Sorry,
Yeah.
but to the person making that comment, all I'll say this is it's not about this personality or that personality. Do you like Alison? Do you like Joe? Do you like this person? Actually understand the issues. Once you understand the issues and what the issues are, it'll be a lot easier to navigate this thing, which actually requires some homework. And like Alison's talks are really long. She's putting out this, 12 parts, 13 parts now. This series, it actually is long, and I sent it to people. I'm like, don't just read this, like, don't just scan over it, read it, like, follow the links, like actually spend some time with this, because you have to really learn what it is we're facing. If you don't actually know what the problem is, you're going to get off track here. And so a lot of these other people, again, they may be really great in challenging some of the narratives around the biosecurity or the health issues or whatever, but they're actually leading you into the lion's den. So one of the hard lines that Alison's taken is against anyone that's promoting blockchain tokenized economy online, which involves everything that she's opposed to, the smart city, Internet of Things, smart cities, smartphones, tokenization, tokenized living, gamification, all these things. So a lot of these people, if they're promoting that on the right hand while talking about this on the other hand, that maybe there's a problem there. So that's all I'll say about that.
And I don't mind if there are people who are just creating content businesses for entertainment, like, and they're straight up entertainment, whatever. Like, I'm not here to like monitor every person who's taking crypto, but if you are actually creating a brand that says, I want to know what's happening, like and I'm going to find out what's really happening, and I'm going to share that with people who pay me money to have access to this inside information, you can't actually do both things. Or I have not seen that. Like, I have not seen people who are promoting, smart contract life to also deeply interrogate what's happening with it. That is connected to Niantic and In-Q-Tel and the CIA and the military and PSYOPs and all of the things which very clearly connect to, the sort of, people who are into the truth space or the esoterica or these other, deep state histories. Like, it's very logical. Like, you should be able to draw a very clear through line between Marc Andreessen saying, hey, we can't get AI to be sentient yet, but we can do a really good job of pretending they're people and tricking you. And that, and those people want to run contracts in your neighborhood and in your kid's school and the homeless people and the job training sites and your church. And literally they're saying, like, we're going to be really good. Like, maybe we can't get the robots to actually have consciousness, but they'll be able to trick you totally. And I mean, Jason, we've had these conversations of you trying to engage online where they hide comments. They manipulate the entire circumstance. And so, I was pretty patient. I've been calling this since, April of 2020, hoping that people would come up to speed and get the right frame. And they're not. And at this point, I'm not buying the, like, it's too hard. Oh, Alison, it's too hard for me to, like, no. Do you want to live in the CIA's video game? That's it. Literally, that's the short version. And if you don't, then you have to deconstruct all of the networks and the digital money that's coming.
So real quick, someone was asking, like, how are you typing and talking at the same time? I'm managing the chat and the stream. So actually, it's kind of a funny story, which I've mentioned in the past, but YouTube doesn't allow me with my own thing to actually comment on Alison's stuff. Like, it'll show up for me, but it doesn't show up for anybody else, or maybe for select people, or I don't know how they're...
me in the comments.
So it's the irony that I'm managing. Anyways, it's kind of funny story, but let's show another clip because I would like to get through some of these clips. There's some good ones. There's some good ones later. I just don't know where they're at.
Don't get us bounced. I'm going to make sure we talk about the nuclear stuff too.
Well, so far we're good. I think maybe having it, having shorter clips. So I might cut them off. But this one's 39 seconds, and then having it up in the corner, maybe that's hiding it from the or whatever. I'm sure there's some kind of threshold that we're not meeting.
Hide and seek.
Exactly.
In Texas, we say nuclear. We live near George Bush, and he says nuclear.
I hate that. It's nuclear.
There's no extra U in it.
But nuclear. If you read, there's no extra U in there. But anyways,
right?
Pet
Nuclear.
Peeve. I used to say acrost. I used to put T's in my acrost. I was doing roofing, and the guy I was working with was like, "Did you say acrost?" I was like, "No, I didn't." Oh shit, I did say that. Anyways, whatever. Sidetrack. All right.
Here's the thing with nukes. Nukes probably prevented World War III. Right. Nukes. If at the end of World War II, if you asked any of the experts in the U.S. or the Soviet Union at the time, are we going to have a war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union in Europe, another land war, right? Between between the two sides, most of the experts very much thought the answer was yes. And in fact, the U.S. to this day, we still have troops in Germany, basically preparing for this land war that never came.
So I'm just going to stop that there because it's not that important of a clip. But there was a big conversation about nuclear power, nuclear energy, nuclear weapons. And so Marc Andreessen's position was very strongly pro-nuke. And not just nuclear energy, but also nuclear weapons. Well, I mean, Joe was a little bit like not so much on the nuclear weapons, but definitely.
Oh no! At the end, he's like, "Please tell me a good guest to bring on. Who are your people?"
He was more. I think he was more talking about nuclear power as opposed to nuclear weapons. Yeah. Whereas Marc Andreessen was like, "Yeah, nuclear power, nuclear weapons, nuclear everything." So that was just kind of the lead in for that clip. I'll just go to the next one here.
So religion historically is how we sort of transmit ethical and moral judgments, right? And then,
Okay, go ahead, Alison.
So I just want to say, this is actually really important because I would say that there was probably half an hour devoted to the nuclear discussion in this. Like it was second to the AI, like in terms of the amount of airtime that was given to it. It wasn't just a passing thing. And so within this, and again, I will remind you guys of when see, you should be so glad that I, encouraged us all to go to Salt Lake City or Provo because, one of those talks, if you remember, was a guy from the U.S. Department of Energy talking about the molten salt reactors, the nuclear, like the new kind, right? He was coming up with like the safer kind of nuclear energy. And when you go back to what some of these folks are planning with like blockchain villages with like, they're going to pack it in a little freight cargo container and you'd have your own village run on nuclear power. Like that's their plan. And I actually went up to the guy, I can't remember his name, but he's with the US Department of Energy and he was based, I think, in Salt Lake City. And I'm like, hey, do you know about this moonshot project? Do you know about this hologram? Because the US Department of Energy is very closely involved in Lawrence Livermore Labs with that project. And so when you start looking into the history of like, I don't think the Cold War is at all what we were told. And that it was much more about what Alexander Sachs wrote in when he was conveying the Einstein-Szilard letter to FDR to get the Manhattan Project started. Like, sure, yeah, the weapons, but also medicine and energy. Like, and so I think really they wanted the radiological isotopes for this next phase of evolution that they're imagining. And there were several times in that podcast in which they talked about superpowers. And even Rogan talked about like the wellness of evolving to a new state. Like he did say that. And so if you understand within, again, like the, world sensorium, radio eugenics that Drew Hempel has talked about, I think that management of human biological life within a radiological context is really important. Andreessen really downplayed Fukushima. Like, oh no, like maybe only one person died.
Yeah. Really
not that big of a deal. Like literally we've radioactively contaminated most of the ocean, but not a big deal. And I don't think it's not a big deal simply because maybe he has financial investments. I think the goal is actually to develop low-level radioactive exposures to try to catalyze this crazy plan that they've got. And so I think, to me, the fact also that, so in the section at the end where they were talking about, and I don't know if you have a clip, but about the whole climate conversation, because I found them very flip-floppy on the climate stuff. Like, oh, I'm skeptical of some things, but oh yeah, we need nuclear power so that we can solve the problem. Like, it was inconclusive how they were
wanted it both ways.
They wanted it both ways. But when Rogan came on and he's like, yeah, tell me your good guests who are environmentalists who wanted to have nuclear power, they mentioned Stuart Brand. Now, Stuart Brand is of the Whole Earth Catalog, and he's working on that clock in West Texas, Lynn, the 10,000-year clock.
Yeah,
Stuart Brand is part of that.
I wondered about that.
But he's an advisor. What?
Next road trip, West Texas.
Yes, I know, I want to come.
Be there.
So he's actually an advisor, Stuart Brand, to Nicholas Berggrun's Transformation of the Human Project. So you've got Andreessen based in the Bay Area. You've got Transformations of the Human in Berkeley. You've got Stuart Brand, who's advising on that. And then you have Andreessen being like, oh yeah, no, he's totally our nuclear power guy. Like, and it's totally cool with the left. And in fact, this was Andreessen's thing. He's like, who we need to do to like make it really mixed up? We should give the contract for the 1,000 reactors that Nixon proposed to Koch. Let's have the Koch brothers build 1,000 reactors.
And then the environments and the liberals will love it because they're making the Koch brothers fix up the problem. It was pretty ridiculous.
So sneaky.
And he was giddy about it. It was kind of funny, actually.
Sneaky, but like it was over the top. Like, and to me, following the history of secret weapons programs with radiological material and radiological isotopes, a lot of what they were saying is they needed the power plants to create the isotopes to manage that. So imagine, like, part of what he was saying is, Andreessen, you could develop a new system that was all self-contained, that was small and would just run for a certain amount of time, all closed up, and then you just seal it with concrete. And so that, to me, sounds a lot like these molten salt reactors in a freight cargo container. Like, and then imagine if you're actually utilizing that somehow for your biological chemotherapeutic interventions, because Andreessen Horowitz is very deeply invested in the biotech space.
Well, and even at the beginning, they talked about for, militarization, weaponization, deterrence, but also even at the very beginning, they were talking about radiation in medicine. I mean, from the very get-go. Yeah. So, yeah.
And I would say if anybody hasn't looked up the Pugwash conferences, like that's something that I'm doing more research into. But essentially, like, there was a polarity. They needed, after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to have the scientists who said, oh, that was bad. I feel really bad about that, including Oppenheimer, even though he didn't actually feel that bad about it off camera. He was on camera, felt bad about it. And so the Pugwash conferences that still exist, they were started in Nova Scotia, I think, Pugwash, Nova Scotia at some estate, and was Rockefeller affiliates, was to bring together the top scientists around the world, including Soviet scientists and Western scientists, together to talk about these advances all throughout the Cold War. If you were one of these high-level scientists, they were strategically making their plans in a collaborative, non-confrontational format. That was happening behind the scenes while the public was like having all the children hide under the desks.
So a couple things, Alice or Lynn, when you type, if you could just mute, because it's pretty loud. But just remember to unmute when you're done. So I want to get through some more of these clips. I want to say something really quick too, in terms of that whole discussion of nuclear power. There are real issues with, like, what kind of, if we're going to be using all this power, what are we going to use? And the arguments about the problems with coal and these other things are legitimate. Like you said, like, there's, which are we using? I mean, I personally, my view is like we could use drastically less power if we weren't living in capitalism and a system of planned obsolescence. But they're gonna have a new system that's going to be designed to supposedly circular economy and incorporate a lot of that stuff, which is going to
be a Buckminster Fuller Dome.
Buckminster
I'll live
Fuller
in Epcot.
Yeah, live in Disney's Epcot.
Or Dallas's Reunion Tower.
But his whole thing that you can build a self-contained thing and then just like, just decommission it when you're done is nonsense. There's a documentary called Into Eternity about all the problems with storing spent nuclear waste. That's pretty interesting because they're building these massive, deep concrete things, and it's still hot too. So it's like, if I remember correctly. Anyways, it's an interesting documentary. It's been years since I've seen it. Let's do some more clips here because I want to try to get to some of the better ones.
So religion historically is how we sort of transmit ethical and moral judgments, right? And then, we basically sort of, it's the sort of modern intellectual vanguard of the West 100 years ago, whatever, decided to shed religion as a sort of primary organizing thing. But we decided to continue to try to evolve ethics and morals. But if you ask anybody who's religious, what is the process of figuring out ethics and morals, they will tell you, well, that's a religion. And so Nietzsche would say we're just inventing new religions. Like we think of ourselves as highly evolved scientific people. In reality, we're having basically fundamentally philosophical debates about these very deep issues that don't have concrete scientific answers, and that we're basically inventing new religions as we go. So religion.
Okay, so I'm going to show one more clip because I think the next one might be on the same thing, and then we can talk about it. Hang on one second. Plus I want to get through some of these before we have to stop. Okay, so let's just go ahead and do another one here.
What does it mean for individuals to cohere together into a group? And what does it mean to have that group have sort of the equivalent of an operating system that it's able to basically all agree on and prove to, members of the group are able to prove to each other that they're full members of the group.
And it seems universal.
And then they transmit, right? What religion does is it encodes ethics and morals. Right? It encodes lessons learned over very long periods of time into basically like a book, right? And a set, parables, right? And lessons, right? And, commandments and things like this. And then, 1,000 years later, people in theory, right, or at least are benefiting from all of this hard-won wisdom over the generations. And of course, the big religions were all developed pre-science, right? And so they were basically an attempt to sort of code human knowledge, pre-scientific human knowledge into something that was reproducible, even in an era where you didn't have mass literacy.
Do you think that's why most attempts at encoding morals and ethics into some sort of an open structure turn religious?
Yeah.
They almost all turn to this point where it seems like you're in a cult.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop right there. Thoughts? Hey, guys.
Well, I think that's very much about the cyber physical. I mean, they need to code the rules of behavior, and they need to legitimate it as if it's a cultural norm, which I don't think it will be. But I think part of what I'm writing about now is these charter cities. And again, we had the guy from the charter cities at the Mormon Transhumanist Conference, where they were creating these state of exceptions like clean slate cities, with the understanding is like within these clean slates that are built, in these sustainable formats for impact finance markets, that they would be encoded probably as they're built with the cultural values. And then the framework that Paul Romer, who developed this concept, is that you would have a choice, so that it's almost like a homeowners association, but like a little more draconian, that going in or joining a company, what the culture is, and that the theory that you would have a choice whether or not you joined it or not. Like maybe there's choice A, B, or C of different cultural norms, and one of them is the Andreessen, I'm an engineer and the universe doesn't care, and one of them is like animist nature, and one of them is Catholic, evangelism or something. Like there would be these different models, and that you would opt into the one that was a good fit for you. But the reality is, we know it is that the disruption that's happening is that people are going to get slotted in wherever, and they're just going to have to accommodate themselves to the coded culture, not the other way around.
Well, and one of the things I do is Google alerts on things like Islamic blockchain or other, or like what we've studied with the Mormon transhumanists or the Mormon Transhumanist Association, but how, like you were saying, with the cultural values will be embedded. And so like with the with the Muslims, you can do the Sharia compliant blockchain or Sharia compliant investing through Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And then within, so it doesn't really matter. All faiths will be engulfed in this system. And then with there's other, the things like we mentioned before, like voting, and I mean, anything can be put on this ledger, and the compliance, in order to participate in the system, you have to comply with whatever they're, if it's the 10 Commandments, or if it's, I mean, you can embed anything into that cultural, those values.
And I would also say one of the things that I think is interesting is like the tokenized voting. You're right, Lynn, about like radical exchange. So Buterin and Weil were two of the people who wrote the Soulbound Tokens paper, and they're two of the 8 people on the board of this radical exchange. And they're talking about plural property and, digital dignity and the tokens and plural voting and plural property. And so we're seeing coming out of, like, I've had a number of people tag me on stuff in Utah where they're we want to do blockchain voting. And this is also connected with the guy, the overstock.com guy in blockchain. And they're thinking blockchain voting means like, the once or twice a year where I go, like I would do my regular ballot and I check only at some sort of app. Like they're imagining the old version of voting implemented in a digital format. And that's not what the plan is, that you will have quote unquote radical participation, that like there will be hundreds of things to be voted on about the cultural values of your smart community, that you would never have the capacity to personally have an informed understanding of the implications of all of these different policies, but you would cede to an agent, to a digital representation of yourself, the ability to vote on your behalf, like a proxy vote. And that these tokens,
like AI swarm.
Dozens.
Remember Bezos did the AI swarm, and it was kind of like a voting. The hive mind could vote on something like, where should I donate next? Hive mind, that AI swarm would nudge policy or decision making, or wherever he decided to put his energy next. And I think we saw that in The Circle, right? Wasn't that in that book? The Circle, where they had something like that.
But you've got all these conservatives in conservative states who are advancing these policies, and it's very clear that they've just picked candidates to sit up in front of them. And they, like, literally, it's not that hard. If I show you a link to say, this is what the digital twin looks like, who's going to be voting for you, if you actually had some sort of integrity, that would give you pause. Like, they literally have graphic, like, this is very sophisticated. The person who's doing it, Cesar Hidalgo, like he developed much of this at MIT, and now he's moved on to France. But it's not a half-baked idea. This is very highly developed technology. And I will just say, in that realm, like at the beginning of the podcast, they were talking about the guy who developed the first optical mouse, Doug Engelbart, in 1968. He was with SRI. And so, like, Rogan was like, oh man, they had that back in 1968. And they're like, yeah, they did. So many of these technologies, the capacity exists for decades before the public has access or knowledge to what's going on. If you're on the inside, it's not scalable, perhaps. Like, it's not ready to be scaled, but the premises are at least 30 years out from what they tell the public. And it's the same with the voting.
Okay.
Well, and there's a congressional candidate, Alison, that I was tweeting back to her. I think you were too, but January Walker, who's running for Congress, U.S. Congress in Utah. So she's a big proponent of blockchain voting, and I do believe that it will be the conservatives, because another reason why they're promoting it is because there's this perception that it's unhackable. And so you will get a clean, authentic, legitimate vote. And if you put it on blockchain, then no one can hack it. You won't have these voter integrity issues and voter the issues that we were having with the perception that the elections are rigged, and there are algorithms that are changing the outcomes. And I do believe that those things are happening. I do believe that they're manipulating elections, but I know that we are being nudged into accepting that this will be the solution, and it will come from the right, because it's mostly people on the right who are saying we need fair elections, we need clean elections.
All right, so let me show you some more clips.
As humans, we want to be members of groups. We want to reform into new cults. We want to reform into new religions. We want to develop new ethical and moral systems and hold each other to them.
And I'll just show one more.
Are you in a culture that has expectations or not, right? Are you in a culture that actually has high standards or not? And this goes back to the Nietzsche point. In a religious environment, you had high standards because you were trying to live up to God.
Okay.
We are now trying to create cultures that we are constructing from scratch, right? They're not religious. We don't believe in God. We're trying to construct value systems from scratch.
And do we value emotions too much?
Yeah. Do we value emotions too much? What do we value? Do we value achievement? Do we not? Do we value, right?
Do we value protecting people from shame? And
do we value economic growth? Do we, do we think people should have to work? Like, by the way, drug policy. Like, do we think it's okay for people? Do we value people not being stoned? Like, and by the way, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. I don't know, but like, it's a thing we're gonna have to figure out.
Okay, I'll stop it there. So again,
whose values? I mean, that's my question. Whose values? Who gets to decide this? I mean, we know that with that math babe, Kathy O'Brien, in that book that she wrote, she said algorithms are opinions embedded in code, and so whoever is creating these systems that we're supposed to jump or comply with, then who sets those values and these high standards? But I think Jason, you touched on this. It's like they are playing God, and so if you believe that your rights and your authority is from God, then none of this is really ever going to be in line with your values or your faith, if we have the freedom to choose what that faith is.
Yeah.
Oh, and then valuing, Alison, you talked about this a lot with the valuing, putting a value on life, and with Nicholas Berggrun's tweet about that is what hypothetically it will look like if we have universal basic income and every life has a certain monetary value, and that you would assign values to the skills and to and even like what Cardano's Charles Hoskinson was saying about you can decide who has the right to work, who is worthy of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't want to show another clip until.
And I can't remember if I. Oh, sorry. Until I did I say at the beginning about the guy with Edley? Because again, that's part of the value system. Like the original tweet that I saw was from this person named Austin Allred, and that he was the CEO of something called Bloom Tech, which is a coding boot camp. And now it used to be called Lambda School. And so they're actually they were a partner with Edley, which is the income sharing agreement platform that they're going to securitize, literally, because, I keep saying this is a digital empire. This is creating a new global economy built on smart contracts, overlaying the original world, but it has to be coded into reality. And so what Andreessen Horowitz is investing in, among others, are the coding boot camps to compel people to make this new empire, because it's not a physical place yet. Like, it exists in bits and pieces, but it all has to be connected and bridged in the standards, and that has to happen. And that's part of the coding. So the valuation and the tokenization of life, and then deciding like, oh, well, you're just a serf. Like, I'm the job creator, because Andreessen was very clear about valuing, like, you should value job creators. Well, what kind of jobs? Like, do we have subcategories of people who create really bad jobs that hurt people, and then jobs that uplift people? And then who's deciding, again, who's putting the weight, like who's weighting these things within the codes, within the equations? It's really diabolical. And I just don't feel like the general public, or even smart people, even people who should know better, have enough background or context, not just on the technicalities, but the cultural context, to make an informed decision, to even have the conversation.
Yeah.
One of the comments here says that we've run out of it says to be able to use humans as currency because they ran out of stuff to gamble. And that kind of goes to the social impact investing in the smart contracts and gambling on the futures, which you talked about years ago, and some of the videos that you've made. And then the cost offsets and all the things tied with the social impact investing. But now, of course, we know it's much bigger than that. I don't know if you want to talk.
And there was nothing about the UN SDGs. They talked quite a bit about climate, the climate narrative. And they talked a lot about carbon, and they talked a lot about alternative energy. But nowhere in there did they talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. Nowhere in there did they talk about megacities or Agenda 21. And even Andreessen was pitching the wonders of remote work. Like, oh, the lockdowns were so great because now everybody can shift to remote work, and you can, you don't have to relocate. You can live next to nature. You can live next to your extended family. You have so much flexibility. And then if you work for, somebody building the digital empire, they'll fly you every 8 weeks to go to a resort so you can hang out and bond and be part of a cult. I mean, that's the narrative. And yet we know, like anybody who works for Andreessen Horowitz knows that the plan is to use the ESG markets to drive people into concentrated, dense megacity regions. Again, I'm not buying that he's dumb. But I have a hard time figuring out, are these people all just actors? Because what his frame is that the people who are concerned about the environment are emotional nature worshipers. That's his line. Not that it's a new investment market for the world economy, is that it's just like those people are hysterical. They don't really follow science and they just worship nature. And that is his frame around the climate stuff. And it's just so disingenuous. And at this point, everybody who's watching that, who has any shred of understanding of what's going on, should be able to recognize the lies in it. He's building his new empire, his new portfolios of crypto assets on ESG investing because his wife built the whole bailiwick.
Okay, let's try some more clips here. And it's kind of funny because even as we're having this discussion, I have a computer algorithm that keeps popping up and telling me, nope, don't do that. Don't do that. You're showing copyrighted material, even though this is completely legal and doesn't even violate their terms of services. Because I know that they do allow for fair use on lots and lots of videos. It's just, they don't
get my channel taken down, Jason.
It won't be my fault if that's not. You'll get another warning is all that would happen.
Mm-hmm.
But we have one on there because we didn't do anything about it. Anyways, that's another conversation.
That would be a lot of work if you had to.
There's no way they can manage it. They need the computers. They need algorithms to manage this thing. They can't actually manage it.
Well, how many more do we got? We maybe should wrap up by 3. I think we've said. I mean, there more chunks to talk
about.
Well,
it seems like as long as I stop it while it's due and then the warning goes away, it seems like it's okay.
Okay.
I think I figured out how it works. So I just stop it. So let's try another one. Yeah.
So this one's only gonna be 2 hours, not
right. If
3
you read the
hours?
Founding Fathers, they talked a lot.
What?
Sorry,
she's pulling our chain.
Oh, okay.
There used to be this concept called the virtues, right? If you read the Founding Fathers, they talked a lot about the Founding Fathers were famously, as Adams and Marshall and these guys said, basically democracy will only work in a virtuous population, right? In a population of people who have the virtues, who have basically a high expectation of their own behavior and the ability to enforce codes of behavior within the group.
So enforcing behaviors within the group. So I'm going to stop that. I have more, but I want to. I'm going to kind of minimize it. So comments on that one.
I mean, I think that's why we can't get through to people.
Yeah.
I think that's why we can't get through to people because literally if they entertain what we're saying about mixed reality, if they entertain what we say about the fact that the United States is a central actor in developing impact markets and the technology to run them, they will be cast out of whatever their other identity groups that they've signed on to, whether that's, crypto or health freedom or whatever. There's a discipline involved and it is a right think. You're not actually allowed to think your own ways. And that's the thing. I think within these coding environments, it has to be binary. Like there's no gray. Increasingly, society will just code the gray out of it. Like you can't be this and that if they're contradictory. Like they're going to weight it so that you're into one category.
Well,
you're
in the
not
digital
allowed
space,
to have.
sorry. Well, within the digital space,
Yeah,
maybe they'll let you do that, but you'll be in a little isolated corner or something. They're like, just like even social
I guess
media.
that's-
Yeah, it's like, well, okay, fine, we'll let you exist, but we're not gonna let anybody actually see you or hear you. We're gonna put you into a box, and you can be over here, But like even here, they're trying to have it both ways because they were having discussions about woke culture on Twitter and the problems with that, which I agree that there's a problem there. But again, they don't talk about the fact that he's actually subtly implying that, and again, like his business investments and then his wife are actually doing setting up systems of massive monitoring and policing of thought and behavior. So it's again like we're going to complain about the management of people's behavior on Twitter through woke culture while setting up a system that's going to be even more invasive.
Right. And depoliticizing it. Now, and one thing that came up in one of the quotes that I thought was interesting is what Andreessen was saying, like, oh, people should still be in charge of the decision making. I think this was under the AI, like the singularity type stuff, like, oh, those decisions should still be in the hands of humans. Now, the thing is, Andreessen is very close with Peter Thiel, right, of Palantir. And literally, I mean, there's one thing of building the digital mixed reality, then the whole other thing of the people who are literally running the infrastructure. And I know, Jason, like you've been doing a lot of work, like spending a lot of time looking at the material that Palantir is putting out. And it goes with what Andreessen was saying throughout the podcast about Greek. It's funny, like the Greek city-state, oh, they were really brutal to each other. Like if you were a member of another city-state, they didn't even think you were human. They would just like kill all the men and, rape the women and take the children as slaves. And that's the Greek city-state. And like we've evolved from there, but the humans should be in charge of the decision-making. But I think increasingly what we're not looking at is that within smart cities, the humans are out of the loop. Like, I mean, you've got some drones, like maybe we're going to come up with, he made a big deal, Andreessen, about like, oh, we don't have a robot that can fold clothes. Oh, it's not that developed. We don't have a robot that can fold clothes, so don't worry about it. But like what? We don't worry about the Boston Dynamics robot police. Like we don't worry about the drone surveillance. Like it was very interesting how they would sideline, like we don't really need to worry about the robots. They can't even fold clothes yet. And yet the militarization through technology systems, whether they're full on, machines that are, visible, or nanotechnology, or just, directed energy, we're not talking about any of those things. So I just found it interesting that he would say the humans should be in charge and yet like not interrogate what his buddies are up to.
So someone just made a comment saying, Jason, I'm just a courier. And no reason to be stressed out. And then they said something like they go after couriers. I don't appreciate that comment, by the way. I don't think of myself as just a courier, and I'm stressed out because I don't want this thing to come to humanity and the life on Earth. So anyways, I just kind of didn't like that comment. So anyway, so let's do a few more clips.
The reason I'm so focused on this whole ethics morals thing is because, a lot of the sort of hot topics around technology ultimately turn out to be hot topics around, like all the questions around freedom of speech are they're the exact same kind of question, everything that we've been talking about to me, which is it's an attempt to reach for, should there be more speech suppression? Should there be less? Is hate speech, misinformation, so forth.
Yes.
These are all these sort of encoded ethical moral questions that prior generations had very clear answers on, and we somehow have become unmoored on. And maybe we ought to think hard about how to get our moorings back.
Yeah. But how does one do that without forming a restrictive religion?
Okay. So, I didn't have the video showing, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we just need to listen
tokens.
To it. Right. Let me see if he says something about that.
Yeah.
I mean, by definition, right? Morality binds and blinds. Like, at some point, yeah. Do you want to live in a world with no structure?
Right.
Like, do you really want to live in a world with no structure? The reason I'm so
Okay. Do you really want to live in a world with no structure? Who's going to give you that structure, Lynn?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to put that structure and set it for myself. And yes, so my own personal faith is restrictive because it says, you shouldn't kill someone. That's a restriction. There are all kinds of thou shalt nots. But I think they're for my own good, but I set them for myself based on what I believe is, so I don't want, I don't want that decided for me in geofencing or other ways that are much larger than just a value that I set for myself, saying that I physically cannot move about and I can't go, from this county to this county, or I can't go outside my little hexagon that is established, my invisible hexagon that is established for me, my little cell here in Dallas. So I don't know. It's disturbing to hear them talk like that.
Would you ever sit down and come up with just some sort of hypothetical structure that people could operate on and at least have better results?
I think that is going to be something that people are going to have to do maybe someday. I might do that someday.
You might do that someday. Yeah. But you clearly have thoughts on it.
Yeah.
And you clearly have thoughts on things like marijuana that maybe perhaps people are using to escape or to dilute their perspective.
Let me give you something I do have strong thoughts on. Let me give you something I have strong thoughts on. Like, do we value achievement?
Right. What is achievement?
Achievement. Do we value outperformance?
Okay, but what is performance? What is achievement?
Do we value people who do things better than other people?
Okay, but what are those things? What about communicate with people? Do we value people who communicate with people better?
Yeah.
Do we value people who are kinder?
Yeah.
Do we are those achievements?
Yeah.
To getting
differences.
Right, but to be able to get your personality and your body and your life experiences in.
So I'm going to pause it real quick because I don't want to set the thing off.
Yeah.
But I think there was enough there to go off of.
So I would just say, to me, what this strikes me as is pathways. Self-improvement pathways, right? We can value lots of things, but we need to show that you're actually working hard at the things that you're good at. And I spent some time last week going through the Julian Huxley treatise that introduced UNESCO. And, they were talking about, well, we need the data. We need to be able to have these workforce pathways. We need to be able to assign people to productive work and to make sure people who would do a bad job don't get in certain jobs. And we need to spend a lot of time on psychometrics. And we need to do all of that engineering, which is very much about both the Common Core and the pay for success workforce pathways, and that'll be managed on your Greenlight blockchain transcript credential against your future economic wages and your income sharing agreements, which is part of what, got us here in the first place with EDLI. And so when I hear like, what do we value and what is your performance measure? Like, there's a key performance indicator baked in. Like, it's not enough that people just be. They're supposed to be on some sort of imperative of improvement. And I heard that quite a number of times in Rogan's dialogue, that to me ties directly back into the social impact finance space, whether you're improving yourself for better wellness, better training, better financial practices, whatever. And I will say, it wasn't in this clip, but early on, one of them said, well, maybe someday, even though it's not sentient, these AI it'll be nicer to hang out with robots than people, which I thought was really interesting, Lynn, given the stuff that's has happened with autism data in Dallas, is that they're working to put robots with kids on the spectrum. And I think it's to monitor those and get their data, and then to normalize too that, like, hey, people are complicated and messy. Why do we let's not hang out with real people? It's just easier to be with a robot because they're a known quantity and they know you and they won't ever bother you.
They won't hurt your feelings. They won't break your heart.
Yeah.
Robots are so much better at that. Yeah, it's what do they call it? Milo is the robot that was paired with autistic children, so they could cram 35 kids in a classroom and it would be like a teacher's aide. And by these children who are on the spectrum, they tend to be heightened and they're drawn to technology in a way that is heightened more so than your typical learner. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's job creator. Some job creator created that robot. We should value them, right? Like, what's the value in?
Well, and I had the, he asked the question, do we value achievement? Do we value people?
And
who have,
do we value again?
Yeah, right. And I would say we little people do value achievement. And I was just having a conversation today with a friend on the phone, and he was saying, I have no musical abilities. I just wasn't born with those gifts, and I so appreciate those. I'm just so impressed with those who do have that and have that natural ability. And so, yes, I think we do. Just from a deeply human perspective, we value those who have. I mean, we all have gifts, talents, abilities. We all have things that we're born with. We have things that we develop through practice. But what Alison, you were touching on is this whole the nudging us towards pathways, and they've been doing that in K-12 for since the beginning of compulsory education in America and beyond. But the pathways that they're creating now, it's a totally different agenda behind that, and the reskilling, the upskilling, all that New World Order language that you'll hear anyone from Ivanka Trump talking about it at the World Economic Forum. You'll hear our local community college where they're implementing the green light blockchain credentials and putting all these students on a pathway and putting their life on the ledger and on these blockchain wallets that will hold all of their credentials, and they'll have to. You'll see it with LinkedIn with badges and skilling, and having to demonstrate or prove you've achieved that certain level or you have those competencies. So that's they are trying to put value on your skills for these pathways. It's not the same as how we, from just a more personal perspective, what we would value something and be impressed by or seek out those who have a certain skill set or knowledge. This is a totally different deal.
I sent an idea for like a fundraising song. They are the world. They are the people.
They are. They are the ones that.
They are the ones that decide for us. What values matter? All right.
Right.
Well, I would say in the beginning, it was you guys are so good. Just the history part, I think, was kind of, that they started with this early history of computing and the fact that the early coding was games and spreadsheets. Those were the two use cases for personal computers that Andreessen mentioned. He's like, yeah, we all wanted to code games, and we were coding before we even had personal computers. And when spreadsheets came into corporate use. And so I think that's telling, right? Because it's the ledger. You can value people in an open-ended way that becomes different when you put it on a spreadsheet. It's different when you quantify it. And the fact that later on in the other end, when he was talking about crypto, he dated it to Satoshi Nakamoto and Bitcoin. He didn't go back to Scott Stornetta. Which I find it very interesting that someone with that level of knowledge of the history of computing, that they continue to subtly suppress that early history of Stornetta, who spoke at the Mormon Transhumanist Conference, who developed the timestamp document at Bell Labs in favor of the Satoshi Nakamoto Bitcoin story. The Stornetta story gets suppressed, and I think some of that has to do with freedom of speech and information curation. Because in the metaverse, the entire world is made up simply of information. So quote unquote, freedom of speech is really freedom to access and share bits of information, which is different. The entire world of the metaverse is made up of information. And so the freedom of how you shape that information in a digital world is your world. And so the idea of freedom of speech, it's not simply that you get to type a tweet or you get to have a podcast. It's literally how the world is built and curated in these tokenized experiences, right? In your headset or in your, in that way, the game and the spreadsheet and the blockchain ledger and the world as witness, it's I think it all comes together in an interesting way. And I don't think we're used to thinking about the world being made up of information and what it means to the people who curate it, either in overt and clear ways or in sneaky ways like Jason, like no one can ever see your comments on my YouTube channel.
Yes, Leo just made the a comment that it was actually something I was just thinking too, which is within this space, everything's a 1 or a 0. It's a yes or a no.
Yeah.
So it's by its very design, always going to be binary. It doesn't allow for anything outside of this dynamic. Okay.
Nuclear power by far is the safest form of energy we've ever developed. Like overwhelmingly, like the total number of civilian nuclear deaths and nuclear.
So I'm going to skip that one because we kind of already talked about that. But he just goes into, talking about nuclear power.
Spent a lot of time. They want to give the Koch brothers that 1,000 reactor contract.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because somebody that I know in Oregon, actually, and I hadn't had a chance to click through the link, but he said that they had some sort of small reactors, nuclear reactors, like going up a river on a ferry boat in Oregon. Like these models are coming out now. Like, and again, the guy who's building the marketplace, they've got 15 plus year time horizons. They probably invested in those things 2 decades back, knowing that they were going to flip the switch.
Well, so Stuart Brand, who's the founder of the Whole Earth Catalog and one of the leading environmentalists in the 1960s, has been on this message for 50 years. He's written books, he's given talks, he's done the whole thing. There's a debate in the environmental community.
He's talking about nuclear power.
He's in the small
Stuart
minority
Brand
of environmentalists who are on this
promotes
page.
nuclear power.
What's the opposition?
They completely rejected him. The opposition, fundamentally, the environmental movement, I mean, an interpretation of it would be it's primarily a religious movement. It's a movement about defining good people and bad people. Right. The good people are environmentalists. The bad people are capitalists and people building new technologies and people building businesses and companies.
But he's not defining the good people and the bad people.
And factories. And,
no, but what I'm saying is it's not about good and bad people. It's a global market. It's for channeling global capital. You can't tell me Marc Andreessen doesn't know that. Like that's his business, is to find ways of channeling capital and creating bets on this. I mean, that's what the environmental narrative has become within the construct of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a boondoggle for global finance.
Yeah.
And the sensor networks that are going to get all of the data, and then the data centers and the machine learning.
Babies.
It just makes me so infuriated.
So it's a way to demarcate friend and enemy, right? Good person, bad person. And look, it's, these are very large, enterprises, lots of scientists, activists, lots of people making money on, it's like a whole thing.
Right.
And there's a point where
But he's implying that they're making money on woke culture. That's what he's implying.
He's talking about
the money that they're making.
Yeah, it's the whole cottage industry created around the climate change or the global, what do you call it? The whole earth stuff.
When also too conflating like someone who's just a personal environmentalist, like I consider myself, I mean, obviously these terms environmentalist have become co-opted, but I someone who cares very deeply, as I know you both are, about the environment, the ecology, as many people do, and there's often like a conflation of someone who actually cares about the environment and then these institutionalized constructs. So I don't know.
I mean, but this is the guy who did the reality privilege video. He doesn't actually care about the environment. He expects that we will live in cyberspace. So he's trying to have both things.
Right.
Well, what does the environmental movement propose?
They propose degrowth. They propose degrowth. They propose a much lower population level. They propose much lower industrial activity. They propose a much lower human standard of living.
Yeah.
They propose a return to an earlier mode of living that our ancestors thought was something that they should improve on, and they want to go back to that. And it's a religious impulse of its own. Nature worship is a fundamental religious impulse. So
do you think it's also?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you got this, but yeah, because that connects to the piece that Leo and I did around the sovereign nature and that blockchain game of oracles in the park where you're supposed to run around and do, offer up NFTs to the tree altars or something, because they're trying to build, the blockchain people are trying to build like make the nature people look like crazy people. So like that feeds into that narrative. But, and I don't know if did you get the piece about eugenics? Because that was around the same thing. And I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I do have that. Let me see if it's it might even be in that clip. How quick was it after? I've got another 28 seconds on that. Let me just play this. We'll just hear it.
So there's a financial aspect to that as well, because it's an industry.
Yeah, anything becomes sort of self-perpetuating industries. It's
kind of ironic,
but look,
in a sense.
I'd even say look, most of this is not. I would not even say most of this is bad intent. I think most of it's just.
Let me go to the next one here.
But literally, his wife built the NGO public-private partnership poverty mining industry at Stanford. And she's with the Hoover Institution as well. So it's very inappropriate for him to, on the one hand, decry the fact that these organizations are set up not to fix the problems when his wife created impact investing.
Yeah.
Technically, fun fact, we never actually run out of any natural resource. We've never run out of natural resource in human history, right? Because what happens is the price rises, right? The price rises way.
Okay, this is not the one that we're looking for. Let's try this one.
The only thing worse than working in a sweatshop is scavenging in a scavenging in a dump or doing subsistence farming or being a prostitute, right? And so maybe even what we would consider to be low end and unacceptably difficult and dangerous manufacturing jobs may still be better than the jobs that existed prior to that.
So I actually included this clip because I think that's one of the tactics and tricks that's always played to get you to follow into this thing. Oh, look how bad this thing is. So it's always this comparative thing. Like, you're not allowed to criticize this because there's something worse out there. And I just think that we need to reject that idea. You can always find something worse to compare it to. That doesn't mean we can't strive to create, to say no to things that are harmful, or to create something that's better, to work to build something better. But that's
and the thing is,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, the blockchain companies and the impact investing companies that he's investing in, they're going to be setting up climate related initiatives, like having people in Indonesia pick up plastic off the beach with Internet of Things sensors and wearables and tracking for climate change metrics on the blockchain. And it's going to be the same as going through dumps. I mean, maybe slightly less dangerous than going through a dump, picking up all the trash off of a coastline. But that's exactly the things that are being constructed that should be talked about that aren't.
Gotcha. So let me go this one.
We'll fly everybody into a hotel or resort, for 3 days, maybe some of them with families, maybe some of them just.
Oh, so that clip was just him talking about his business is like, he actually says our business is like a cult. Because he had a segment where he's talking about everything's just a cult and it's just different watered down versions and not as extreme versions, but everything's a cult. And his business is a cult, but they like to bring people into these vacation things to give them camaraderie. But one interesting thing he does say here is so do they, there's a point where Joe Rogan asks him, so do you allow people to, challenge, the company policy or, have disagreements or what? He was like, no, he laughed. He's like, no, we don't allow that here. This is for brainstorming and moving us forward. We don't want to have negative, Nellies over here. Anyway, so I just thought that clip was pretty interesting. I've got a few more here.
Well, that does remind me, Lynn, a little bit about The Circle. And again, I would say if people can get the book, I heard the movie was not that great, but the book of The Circle is loosely based on Google Alphabet and the corporate culture, right? The indoctrination and the soft and hard expectations of compliance to that culture.
Yeah, we can write our own book, a new book called The Ledger.
There we go. Actually, I could do a little bit more of this.
And you have a vacation together.
Exactly, right.
Nice.
And real bonding, right? Real
have a good time together.
Have a good time together, have lots of free time to get to know each other, go on hikes, have long dinners, right? Parties, fire on the beach, whatever it is, have people really be able to spend time together.
How much of a benefit do you think there is in that?
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot. Well, and then what you do is you kind of charge people up with the social bonding, right? And then they can then go home and they can be remote for 6 weeks or 8 weeks and they still feel connected and they're talking to everybody online, and then you bring them right when when they start to fray, right when it starts to feel like they're getting isolated again, you bring them all back together again.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Right when they start to feel isolated, we'll bring them back together again. I mean, that idea is not just in the corporate culture, but I think they're trying to do that to society as a whole. Like lockdown, okay, now you can go out.
Well, yeah, we just when they're about to crack the most, then be like, you're free for just a little, and then they're being tugged, in all these different directions, and it totally jacks with your emotions and your mental state. I mean, I just had lunch yesterday with a friend who he's been working for Kroger for 3 years. He was able to make it through the pandemic and all that, and he said it just totally messed with his mental state. I mean, it's awful what happened, because he basically went to work and went home. There was nothing, and that I said that's all by design. All of these mini crises going on everywhere creates the impact markets.
And the benefit of that.
Go ahead.
Bonding.
No, I was just going to say.
Go ahead.
In some of the research that I've been working on about cooperatives, they were looking at Walden 2. And I do kind of want to think about, might want to do a book group about like a shared reading of Walden 2, which is B.F. Skinner's like techno utopia model. And it seems very much like a charter city kind of model. And there was a real life version called like Twin Oaks or something in Virginia back in the 70s, sort of back to the earth, like collective living. And one of the guys who lived there for a while became a sociology professor and an advocate of behaviorism and Skinner. And so there was an interview where he pretty much said, like, cooperative living is great in terms of efficiency, because not everybody needs to have all of the individual things, but you have to overcome the behavior problem. Like, you have to be able to manage human behavior. And that's the hiccup, is that people are difficult and hard to manage. And so the challenge of behaviorism is to get a bead on everybody and like get all of the data, and then to be able to manipulate people to do what you want them to do in ways in which they will find sufficiently acceptable that they won't rebel against it. And I feel like that's part of this whole constructed narrative, right? Know how far you can push until someone falls apart, and then back off. And then over time, with the data aggregation, the digital identity, you'll have a really, really granular profile to know just how hard you can push somebody until they break. And, and these are the people who work for Ivy League institutions and academia. These are the people who are the thought leaders, right? The people that we're supposed to look up to about morals. Because if we just lived cooperatively and we all behaved, we would be able to save the world. And that was the framework.
Well, and Alison, I was thinking too about, with the teachers, you break them so much, then you have to introduce self-care and how you could do all these things to manage the stress that we're imposing on you and hammering down on you. I also wanted to make a point about, you tweeted something about economists, and I forget how you phrased it, but it made me think of Andreessen's wife, and you mentioned the Hoover Institute, and I was thinking about that. There's an economist, Eric Hanushek, and he was involved. He's always brought into the Texas legislature, and I'm sure other legislatures across the country, to talk about teacher quality and merit pay and reducing teachers to these data points and what is a quality teacher. What was it you were saying about economists? Like they're paid. Do you remember? It was just maybe yesterday. You mentioned
maybe it was about the Soros.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Soros doesn't pay activists. He pays economists. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wrote a whole piece about this Institute for New Economic Thinking. Go ahead.
Okay. So let's carry on.
So the big thing you do, I think, and this is what we try to do, is you basically declare what your values are, right? So you want to be like your company. You want to be very upfront, and you want to basically say, here's what we stand for. And so we do this, in a couple different ways. For example, one of our core values is that we think that technology is a positive for the world. right? And if you're the kind of person who wants to be a technology critic, like that's just inconsistent with our values. We don't employ technology critics. Have many other places that they can work. Like
how so in terms of technology critic? Like, what do you mean by that?
Just like the kinds of people who want to go online or want to write articles or whatever about how evil all the technologists are and how evil Elon is and how evil capitalism is and like all this stuff. There's lots of other places. There's lots of other things.
Okay.
No one's going to pay you a six-figure salary.
I can't get into technology.
Comments? So yeah, he was talking about the company culture. And I thought about this for a long time too. It's just like people aren't allowed to have free will. I mean, you work for a corporation, you have to contort to the ideology that's within there. And now that they're trying to, even if you work for a company and they're now policing your behavior outside of your what you do at the job. It's not just a matter of a conversation you're having at the water cooler. It's employers regularly look at people's Facebook profiles and find out who they are. We don't, so I don't know. That was just kind of an interesting clip.
Well, yeah, you're only allowed to be a techno-optimist. Like if you're working for Andreessen Horowitz, technology is the answer to any problem.
Yeah, you just go with it. We're just going to keep moving forward. You don't question it. And he said you have to declare what your values are. And so, I understand this is total corporate culture. We have to establish what are our core values, and that's our blueprint and our creed. Well, they also do that in education, and they are creating these graduate profiles. What does a graduate look like who comes out of this ISD? And every ISD, every school district in really the country, and even higher ed is doing this, and they all have the same stupid, it's like a color wheel, and they have all these different profiles that these are what our graduates should look like, and they're all the same. There's nothing really that unique.
And that's connected to Partnership for 21st Century Skills, which is Battelle for kids. And again, Battelle is out of Ohio, and Battelle Institute was the place that they coordinated the uranium enrichment for the Manhattan Project. And now they run 8 Department of Energy labs. So you don't tell me that Marc Andreessen and Joe Rogan spending 45 minutes talking about like how amazing nuclear power is and how we're going to have portable this, that, and the other doesn't relate to Operation, Moonshot Goal 1 and living as a hologram and Battelle setting up the portrait of the graduates. It is connected.
It is connected. Yeah.
One of the comments is, why is this guy so popular? He's very boring. And I would say it's not really about popularity. It's about this guy, has a lot of power and access to a lot of resources.
Just the power.
So yeah, a lot of people. I mean, I find Elon Musk profoundly boring. That he's lifted up and yeah.
But he was on SNL, Jason. He was on Saturday Night Live.
Did they mean Rogan or Andreessen?
Oh, you know what?
Oh yeah,
Actually,
Andreessen.
I was thinking that you know what? Maybe clarify that, because I thought they were saying
it was
Andreessen,
kind of a boring interview. I have
maybe,
to say,
maybe it was talking about Rogan.
I mean,
we're way more interesting.
It was. They didn't say a lot for 3 hours. Like, there were these 4. It was like singularity, coding morality, nuclear power, and wokeness in corporate culture. Like those were the main takeaways with the other piece. I will say, since we didn't get to the eugenics, I'll just put in a plug for my series about synthetic pretenders, because I'm linking the Human Betterment Foundation in California as the through line from the Spanish mission system of domination and forced conversion, which is, I think, what's going to be happening with the blockchain biodigital convergence, all the way up through the synthetic biology and the California trust framework. And so the eugenic piece is really, really central. And it's quite interesting that Andreessen on his own brought it up in the conversation. I can't remember exactly what the content, I think it was degrowth. He was saying that the climate narrative tracks through from eugenics, population control, to degrowth, to environmentalism. And that was his through line. But he's like, after World War II, they stopped with the genetic stuff.
I do have that
and
clip
literally
somewhere.
His company is fully invested in biotechnology.
You played it, Jason. He said degrowth right before he said that about the environment.
I might have cut off the part where he mentioned.
Like, but he literally brought up eugenics.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because he's the one who kind of pushes back on the wokeness. But the eugenic narrative was framed pretty much in his context about Africa. And so he made it like solely racialized, where really the eugenics narrative, at least in California for the Human Betterment Project, had to do with feeble-minded people who were presumed as incapable of performing up to economic expectations, because this was happening during the Depression. And so they were like, those poor people have less intelligence and are less able to pull their weight, and therefore don't really deserve to live or reproduce. And so I'm not saying that the eugenics argument isn't at all racialized. It certainly is to a point. But if you're not also talking about the economic imperative of population management, you're missing it, because none of this 3 hours that they included really addressed the automation and dispossession of the fourth industrial revolution. There was a brief mention of, like, after the Foxconn phone fabrication, there was a reference to bringing chip manufacturing back to the US, especially because it's concentrated in Taiwan. And I think Seb's at Gnomes for Truth she had a really good piece about the chip lithography space and why it's centered in Taiwan and why they want to bring it back onto the US, into North America, and the Intel's doing that. But besides that, there really was no conversation about what was coming with the disruption that all of their investments were about to cause. There wasn't a reference to UBI or jobs guarantees or any of those things, which I think is really telling. In 3 hours, it wasn't a short interview.
Alison, there's a comment about the Georgia Guidestones, which I hate even addressing that, but because it has depopulation on there, they were blown up. There was an explosion there. I don't know if you've seen that. And so I think that's a distraction. I think that's on purpose. And it's, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, for me, I think a lot of it is about energy. And I do think that people do things for ritual reasons. I think it's also really easy to get caught up in things like the Georgia Guidestones and not actually spend any time investigating what Laura Arrillaga was up to at Stanford, So people pick the things that are like kind of sexy and kind of sensational, they're esoteric. And again, I'm not to say that they don't actually do ritualized things. I mean, that was part of Leo and our conversation, was about like the Queen's Jubilee. And there's definitely some over the top stuff, but if you want to note it in passing, but I wouldn't get caught up, because that also plays to the whole mass genocide, which, while I agree very much that this is about population management, it's population management, as Andreessen says, to get the data to feed the machine learning systems. The new economy is the data economy. And in that, people who willingly participate in it are worth something to them. So again, they may create situations where people have compromised health, both physically or mentally, or they do create problems for people so that they can later on improve them. But I don't think it's the mass depopulation. That's not where I'm at. I mean,
well, even Marc Andreessen, in this thing talks about that. He's like, some people, the environmentalists want to depopulate or whatever, and that's how he framed it. But it was clearly, his position was, we want more people. He didn't come out right out and say it, but that was kind of his take on it. And someone said, this is someone asked, the Guidestones are a distraction from what? I would just say, and I'll put a plug for Alison, but you've got this multi-part series that you've been putting out. I think you're on 12 or 13 now. And it's just jam packed with like really, relevant and useful information. And so I think a lot of our frustration a lot of times is people are having these conversations about, oh, someone blew up the guide zone that's kind of narrow, and like, yeah, but what about all this? What about like go to wrenchinthegears.com and read her her series. There is so much content there that needs to be discussed. And so that's been our frustration, is like those discussions aren't happening in the alt media space. And some
of it, I think, is like the history matters. This doesn't come out of nowhere. And because of my situation of seeing this unfold in Philadelphia, which is a poor city that's surrounded by wealth, like the poor are the test bed. And so a lot of the conversations about the carbon credits or the social control are coming like from people who don't fall under the category of getting welfare, like getting public assistance. The majority, not all, but the majority of people out there on social media are immediately internalizing it to their middle class, professional class lives. And I'm like, I'm not saying it's not coming for y'all, because it is. It's coming for everybody, unless you've got like a couple billion. But you actually need to be responsible and empathetic if you're going to model values, to see how it's been affecting low-income people who have been managed through these systems for at least 30 years. And within that, like I did a big piece about Mexico and conditional cash transfers and the World Bank, and the way in which they were controlling low-income women, especially in the southern part of Mexico, and their children through their education, through nutritional supplements, through injections. They had to jump all these hoops. And this was in the early 90s, right? And so if we actually want to understand this with integrity, we can't just pretend that it just showed up today and is after us and our family, and that it wasn't already doing this to people around the world for years. Now, again, do we want to just sit there and feel guilty about it? No. But you actually have to understand how the machine works. Like these broad stroke things about, like, I'm just going to read what the World Economic Forum says, or Yuval Harari, or whoever, without digging a little deeper, it's not doing a service to the topic. And, I'm not saying everybody has to agree with my analysis, but do your own homework. Like, if anything, like, get out of the group think and do your own homework.
Well, and what it looks like what are solutions that we can do? I think listening to Harari, I mean, that did engage a lot of people, and it's shocking and frightening to think about human 2.0. But I always try to give people tangible, like a concrete thing that you could actually do here in the present, right now in your city, or in your, with your own children. It's difficult because we feel helpless, and we can always talk about the problems and all the issues that are coming. But what do we do? And what does that look like? I know you do it, Alison, with your the kind of nature, the photos you take, and the walks, and the how you assemble natural things, and you do these videos in front of these high-tech institutions that are imposing a lot of these things, and you say, I do not consent, and it's like a declaration. And you expose it while also standing. I don't know. I've told parents, make Swiss cheese of the data. Like if you can cut off this source here and that there. Yeah, ask the questions.
Like literally at this point, we can say, but witness to people and say, listen, this says they're going to tokenize people. This here, it said, this is a very influential person who's working with the most high level. They're going to tokenize. Are we tokenizing people? Go to your church and say, are we tokenizing people? Go to your job. Say, is this the future we're building? Because I keep trying to say, I think if we knew, we would not choose to do it, which is why, that whole thing with Greg Carlwood was so frustrating, is that dude, what a soul-bound token. Like, if you don't, here's the article. Like, you are a parent of we're making the choice, and we actually have to stand firm. Like, yeah, maybe you still take crypto or whatever, but be prepared to tell the truth and say, are we doing soul-bound tokens? Are we creating mixed reality knowing that the CIA is behind it? Are we tokenizing people and making bets? Because ultimately it's going to be AI supercomputers for hedge funds that are running this. And is that the legacy we leave for the kids and for nature? Because in that way, that none of that is partisan. None of that is identity politics. None of that is divisive. It's simply saying, I do not think on behalf of natural life on this planet that we should do this. And in every space and through your gifts, because it's energetic. And that's the thing about the Guidestones is like, I think that there are energies. I think that there is a sacred and profane engagement going on. I think these people know how to mess around and stuff that we don't know. And whether you want to call it esoterics or metaphysics or quantum physics, they're getting in that space. But the space of the human heart, the heart and mind, that's the power. And they are after it. Like the more and more you hear them talk about, like even Andreessen, about connecting like your gut and your thought and your consciousness, they know that that's powerful. And I don't think that there's anything stronger than our love and commitment to existence with whatever gifts. And you sing songs, and Jason, you make films, and we do this work together. And whether you find your gift and bring it out into the world and just say, like, we're, I don't know, are we the apostles against this cybernetic enclosure? I don't know. I wish there was an easier, no one gave me a book. And I could be doing more.
Well,
maybe I'm not.
They give you a lot of books. They give you a lot of books, and you read physical books online, and you use the medium to share and connect with people. I think that's, we do that at the local level. Like somebody was talking about establishing in the comments section, they were talking about, meeting with people in their neighborhoods and wherever they live, and the face-to-face is very important. And then I think helping people and those who are struggling and those that don't have what we have, you've got to help people and connect with them. Otherwise, the nonprofit
culture war.
Fake.
Honestly, that's the thing. We need to stop playing the culture war stuff. Seriously, like on both sides. Yeah. And, I have lots of people following me. And these days I'm looking at every new person that I can see. And if what you're doing is simply sharing polarizing content, I'm removing you, because ultimately we have to get beyond that, because we're not each other's enemy. Like, I was just talking to somebody who comes from a liberal point of view. And I said, we're not each other's enemy. The thing is, we have to deal with the BlackRock computer. We have to deal with Aladdin. That's where we're at. So like, make a conscious commitment to yourself of where you're going to put your energy. Like, and if you're in a polarizing space, do you have the guts to step outside the whatever groupthink that Andreessen and all these people were talking about, and risk being shunned simply to say, and not in a mean way, but guys, we have to step back. We're not each other's enemy.
Yeah. And the reaction, the reaction to this thing is part of the control, the manipulation, and people don't see it. They just like, look what these people are doing. And then they get all worked up and they get all emotional. And it's like, actually, you're being played just as much as the people that you're pointing your finger at.
So true. Yeah. And you were mentioning the heart and the mind, and keeping us disconnected is a way to keep us from having any collective power to fight it.
So I have just 3 more clips. Let's see if we can do it. I think they're short, and I might even cut them off even shorter. But let's see what we can do here.
What are your feelings about the prevalence of, even these sort of novel coins or novelty coins, and the idea that you could sort of establish a currency for your business? That's like, there was talk about Meta doing some sort of a meta coin, right. And that a company could do that. Google could do a Google coin, and they could essentially not just be an enormous company with a wide influence, but also literally have their own economy. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, so this has happened before. There's a tradition of this, and so the frequent flyer miles are like a great example of this, right? In fact, to the point where you have credit cards that give you frequent flyer miles to sort of cash back. So companies have that. you may remember from the 70s, it was more common in the old days, but there used to be these things called like A&P stamps. There used to be these like saving stamps you'd get, and you go to the supermarket and you buy a certain amount and they give you these stamps. You could spend the stamps on different things or send them in.
Okay.
So there were sort of private so-called script kind of currency issued by companies in that form. Then there's all
Company
these games
script.
that have in-game currency, right? And so you play one of these games like World of Warcraft or whatever, and you have the in-game currency, and sometimes it can be converted back into dollars and sometimes it can't, and so forth. And so, so there's been a long tradition of companies basically developing internal economies like this and then having their customers kind of cut in some way.
The company store.
Yeah.
That's what we're moving towards.
He makes it sound so much nicer, right?
I mean,
that's just, like, yeah, there's some coal mining towns that you can't buy anything except at a double markup with their script. Their script isn't good anywhere else. Like, literally, some days it feels like that's the future. The future is like we're supposed to scrabble together and live off of gift cards, loyalty token points, and, UBI is the thing that they're building.
And
the other thing.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the idea that these companies can be their own banks, financial institutions, like these industrial banks are really central to the impact investing space. And Utah is one of the states that has the most industrial banks. Like Goldman Sachs has its own bank too. And the industrial banks are running the social impact bonds. So like GE had its own industrial bank. There were some that were brand name banks. These were not banks that you could just set up your own retail account. They were simply trading to each other. And I do believe in my heart that that's where the public banking system is going to go too, unfortunately, because those people pretend that they're experts, but they don't want to understand what the investments are going to be.
Right. Okay. Let's do boom.
I'm not religious, and I'm not defending religion per se, but once upon a time we had the idea that the body was a vessel provided to us by God, and that like we had a responsibility. My body's my temple. I have a responsibility to take care of it. Like, okay, we shredded that idea, right? And then what do we have? We have this like really sharp now demarcation, this really like fantastic thing where basically if you're like if you're in the elite, if you're like upper income, upper education, upper whatever capability, right? You're probably on some regimen, like you're probably on some combination of weightlifting and yoga and boxing and jujitsu and Pilates and like all this stuff and running and aerobics and all that stuff. And
so I'll just chime in here. Like, so he's talking. This was talking about the body positive, and they were having this conversation about the media is just saying, oh, it doesn't matter, like you can be fat or whatever, which I'm overweight, but the conversation was about. He was saying the elites are actually in really good shape, and I don't know. Do you want to say something about that?
It's like he said we shredded that idea about God and that our body is a temple that is created by God. We shredded that idea. Okay, so God's out, and then worshiping your body positive is in. Like now, okay, so now the elites have this regimen, and they do cold. I know I saw some tweet where Rogan does cold. What do you call that? Where you submerge yourself in cold water. I don't know, some cold thing that people are doing now. So the idea is that religion, well, I was trying to say this earlier, but I'm not a religious person, but I have a faith. So religion is working your way to God and doing all these certain steps. So I'm not for that either, but I think that, we call them religions, all these different faiths. And he's saying that, okay, that's out because now we can be our own God. And like that Mormon transhumanist conference, they were basically saying that, you can decentralize God, and you can be your own God, and you become like a God, and you can make everything equitable through all this technology. So I don't know if that's the same thing that he's saying, but it sounds like it.
Yeah, I can't remember. Like,
and if you're not, you're probably like, if you just look at the stats, like obesity is like rising like crazy. And then it's this weird thing where like the elite, of course, the elite.
Okay, go ahead.
Just on the body positive image, that's the preventative health, wellness, social impact finance space. That's the space that many of the alternative health providers who have sold on to the crypto schemes, when they set up your blockchain health records and your blockchain, like the personal savings accounts for healthcare, those are going to be the healthcare equivalent of the ESAs, the education savings accounts. Same game plan, Lynn, but that'll be for your health stuff. So, like certain companies, if you work for them, you can save a certain amount of money into an account pre-tax. So you get a little incentive to set aside money for health expenses. And then those are going to be vouchers that you'll be able to use in alternative spaces, but on the condition of the impact data being fed back, right? And none of the health conversation.
This is my degree. Like, I had no idea.
I know.
This was what I
well,
was,
and the thing is, like, Jane Fonda was a
degree.
big piece of this. Like, I don't know if you remember, Jason, in the film Hypernormalization. I think she was in that. And it went from talking, and of course, looking back, she was probably always a plant for forever. But like the idea that she was a peace activist, but then eventually she just fell back into being married to Ted Turner and being a fitness guru. And like instead of trying to control
Ted Turner
the world. Oh, he's all about disarmament and the UN and all the nuclear stuff. Yeah. And the UN. So it's all connected, but even just the narrative of going from like self-management, like the rigor of managing your body as a machine, because that's going to be the future of work. Is like, you don't actually get to do a job. Your job is to take care of your mind and your body according to the protocol someone else has decided, which may very well involve integrating yourself with some sort of like biodigital materials, which the vaping thing was odd. I don't know if you got, like, that was part of this. Like,
yeah, I didn't grab any clips
about,
from that, but yeah, there was a whole conversation about.
But like, so Andreessen was saying how he was concerned about the legalization of cannabis and the rising rates of use in the states where it was legal and the increasing pushback against tobacco. And he was seeing some dynamics there. And Rogan got all sideways because I guess Juul, the vaping stuff, was going to be more heavily regulated or made difficult to access. And he didn't know. Outlawed, yeah. And he was like, oh, I can't believe that. But all you have to do is look up vaping and nanoparticles, and like, it's just everywhere. So again, how can you be the wellness dude and like you're over there, again, I'm not regulating it for other people, but the vaping thing, if you understand the nanotech space, it's not great. It's not great. So.
Yeah. I swear I remember reading that Ted Turner funded the Georgia Guidestones. That'd be so weird. I don't know if that's true.
I don't know that
I thought they said that they don't know where they came from. That was what I read.
He did it back in, I don't know whatever year they were erected.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, around Atlanta, there's just, between Georgia Tech and the CDC, and Atlanta's got a lot going on.
Yeah. I just don't think that's even even the conversation about the Georgia guys.
I think it's really meant to keep people.
I don't think it's even that important, really.
Well, I'm good at distracting us. So. But I was going to tell you another solution, because the local level, with the whole blockchain wallets, the health vaccines, the healthcare, your skills, your transcripts, all of that being on blockchain, and then also the fitness piece with the Cooper Aerobics Center being joining forces with Greenlight Credentials is one way. I knew I would lose. I mean, I assumed I would lose, but running for office in that trustee seat where they had done the Greenlight deal and just running to expose. You can run knowing that you will not win, and that's fine. You run to use the platform as an opportunity, because it's the only time people really were listening. For 4 months straight, I was campaigning, going to forums, candidate forums, saying things that people didn't, that they may not have known about or they didn't want to hear, but it was an opportunity, that's one solution. So running just to expose and to use the platform.
When back on the body positive health thing, the presentation that we really care about your health. We're really concerned about your mental health. We're really concerned about your physical health. Is a complete, it's just a lie. Like, this is not about your health. Like, I guarantee you, I'm more concerned about my health than they are. Even though I know that I have, challenges and issues that I need to overcome, and if there are things out there that I could that would help me with that, that's great. But that's not what this is about. Like, and that's what the work that you've been doing, Alison and Lynn, showing that this is about markets and it's about control, cybernetic control.
And also the information economy, like the health digital twins are the beachhead for the digital twinning. That and probably the personalized learning platforms are the two key areas that they're looking to build out the simulations. Both the health stuff for how your biochemical operations work, and then the learning for how your mind works. That's all data for their system. And Andreessen speaks very clearly about that in the beginning about, yeah, well, AI isn't going to be sentient, but what we are really good at is we get these linear algebraic equations and then we run the data. And that Google's so far ahead of all of this because of, its vast access to data. And that's, a huge thing that got baked into the school districts that we just gave away, our kids, everything into the school districts, and just bow down to Google Alphabet for that. And people weren't thinking, because we didn't have the language to understand even what a digital twin was 6 or 7 years ago. Nobody could even, now Google knew, the people at Alphabet knew, I'm sure Marc Andreessen and Tamika Tilleman knew what was coming, but the regular people, we didn't even have words to talk about it. So how can you protect yourself if you don't even have the words? And I think that's where we're trying to do is like build up some muscles and some vocabulary so people can start to figure out how to articulate it. Because it's work.
Well, and MM here says, I can only focus on the educational aspect of this new global plan. It is where I can fight for the children. The rest is too big. So, and that's a very good point. And they also made a point lower down in the comments saying where people can see what is happening in their own lives, keep the message focused to that. Alison, I know we reference education all the time, and that is a very specific place that you can make a difference. And standing in the gap for your child.
The telemedicine will be coming into the community schools. So you need to, if schools is your space, that's great. But ultimately, many of the social provisions, which again, I'm never saying that those needs aren't there, that children don't need access to, eyeglasses or a dentist or some of these things, but the way in which it's going to be provided is about the information economy. They're going to put in food pantries into the schools. They're going to do, and again, that's not to say that there aren't families that are not hungry, but you shouldn't have to have a behavioral script program in your school so that your child can get a jar of peanut butter. I mean, the school is going to be that anchor point, and that's something, the conservatives have been very on target with for a long time. Unfortunately, it still tends to be framed in ways that are...
We don't care. The conservatives don't care about people.
No, so I mean, we do. It's just you don't want them on the blockchain.
Yeah. Sure. And so they were right in knowing that this, they call it the nanny state. And they were right in saying that this is not the role of the school because, like Peg Luxick said, she said, well, they don't have a family, they don't have any money, and they don't have a school. Now they're screwed, in both directions. Whereas those with means, they at least have the family intact, and their schools are being stripped of all academic focus. But yeah, no, we're seeing the community schools model is a perfect tool for them to, you no longer need your education coming from your local school, that as an institution. You can get your learning on your device, moving through your playlists, the competency-based learning and the digital learning. And the school will be for your food pantry, like you said, your healthcare, your vaccines, your mental health care, and your feminine products, and whatever you need there. That's what the school hub will be. And we can see that. I mean, they've had Parkland Hospital in Dallas. They've had a partnership with our Dallas ISD schools and having the healthcare options through the schools since 1996. So this is not a new thing, but you'll see it in more large urban districts.
But you can imagine like the school IDs having the QR code, right? You just go through your day at school swiping your code with the data all being picked up. You swipe in the morning, you swipe in to go to the bathroom, you swipe in to like stop by the food pantry, you swipe in for your lunch, you swipe in for like every single thing, you swipe into your teletherapy treatment, everything gets aggregated, and it's the interoperability on blockchain that allows these jokers like Andreessen's wife to make the bets on people's compliance.
Right. Well,
eventually, we had QR codes to go to the bathroom at the public school.
Eventually, you won't even have to, I'm sorry. Eventually, you won't even have to swipe in because it'll be tracking you, and it'll already know what you're doing and where you're at. And oh, you just did that. Just like with the parking, they're like, you don't even have to do anything, just park. We'll send you a bill. I mean, they already have that. Like on the toll roads, you just go down the toll road. We know who you are. We'll send you the we'll send you the bill. Or
Andreessen would call that progress.
Or they'll or we'll just automatically dock your account. Yeah.
Okay, so I have to, this is kind of funny. I'm actually interviewing someone who does Web 3.0, and I'm moderating a panel, and I have to interview him in 6 minutes.
I got one more clip that's 1 minute. So let's try to shoot for one more.
Do we value population growth?
That's a question,
right? Do we value having kids? Right?
Yeah.
Is having kids something that contributes to the human story, or is
depends on who's having kids?
Or is
have you seen Idiocracy?
Yes.
Mike Judge was on the other day, and the podcast actually came out today. And Mike Judge is awesome. And his movie Idiocracy, I had never watched it. I had only watched clips, and I watched it prior to him coming on the show. Yeah. The fucking beginning scenes where they explain how the human race devolves is fucking amazing. It's so funny.
Yep.
That's kind of what we're worried about, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, right now there's a movement afoot among the elites in our country that basically says having anybody having kids is a bad idea, including having elites have kids is a bad idea because climate.
Well, Elon doesn't think that.
Well, exactly. So Elon has been surfacing this issue in I think a very useful way because I think this is a real question.
Yes.
There's a long history in elite Western thinking. There's a long history in elite Western thinking about this question of whether there should be kids, who has kids.
Right.
100 years ago, all the smartest people were very into eugenics, right? And then later on that became something called population control. And then in the 70s, it became something called degrowth. And now we call it environmentalism. And we basically say as a result, more human beings are bad for the planet, not good for the planet.
Is that eugenics though?
Really? Yes. Well, it's descended from eugenics. It's like it's eugenics itself. Let's say eugenics was discredited by World War II. Hitler gave eugenics a bad name, legitimately so. That was a bad idea. So it shed the overt kind of genetic engineering component of eugenics, but what survived was this sort of aggregate question of the level of population, and so the big kind of elite sort of move.
Anyways, I'll just stop it there.
Yeah. It's disgusting. You know what? It all boils down to life. How do you value life? And I'm not even talking about abortion and what you think about that. It's life at all levels. How do you value life? And not in a monetary value, but do you value that makes me sick listening to that. It's disgusting.
Well, and I love that he pretends that it's not about genetic engineering anymore. When he has like giant portfolios of genetic engineering products.
He loves eugenics. Right.
And he talks about the elites as if he's not an elite. I mean, that's what's really fascinating here.
Now it's just in vogue to be a eugenicist. Truly.
But we call it like high tech.
Baby.
But did you hear Rogan? Like the way he said, he's like, yeah, who gets to have kids? Like, it didn't really sound like, it sounded like he was kind of with that program of like controlled, who gets to have what choice. Like, oh, how many kids can you have if you can afford a $14 million mansion on the water? I guess you get like, what, 6? Is that the credit? And that's the credit system. What are your financial resources to support these children? And then that's where it's going to go.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, not to get lynched here or whatever, but I do think that, there is a problem that they're addressing. It's just who gets to, these guys are going to decide who has kids and who doesn't have kids. But obviously, they even with the education, there's some of the other clips we've shown in the past about, the parents aren't engaged, people are having kids and not taking care of them. Yeah, those are all real problems. But these people, these elites, their solution is not a good one. But I think that's where people get caught up in the conversation. They say, oh yeah, there is a problem, here.
See, I don't even know that I agree with Malthusianism. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that there are many other issues that could be addressed in terms of resource distribution, like, and management of industrial agriculture and many things that we know have been like designed to intentionally not work and not function, to create famine, to create wastelands, like to create these things that are not natural. Like, it's not like we are living in any way a world driven by natural systems. This is largely unnatural and directly linked to the military and defense finance interests.
Absolutely.
So until people get that straightened up, like, I don't think it's anybody's business to decide people's reproductive access.
Absolutely. I agree. And also too, but you said distribution, like I even frame it differently. It's not even about, because that's just kind of like a centralized thing. It's like, I think people can take care of themselves, and this sounds like right wing, but it's not. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have systems in place to help people out, but it's, if you take the boot off the neck, there's a lot that people that can do to self-organize within communities. But there's all these costs in life and these restrictions and these hoops that you have to jump through in order to just basically survive that don't even need to be there in the first place. So I don't know. It's just, I'm trying to say there's a different framing even about that, because like the left is always like, we need to redistribute, the resources and the wealth. Well, who gets to do that? How does that done? Obviously, that's an issue. Like, I don't know what the solution to that is, but I just see it as like, whether it's poverty or
Harbor Georgism.
right. Yeah. We need a land tax. It's anyway, I don't know. I just thought I would throw that out there.
Okay.
Well, thank you guys.
Have a good interview, Lynn. Thanks.
Yeah.
So, I didn't think we'd make it to 3 hours again, but we did.
I know, we're long form.
3 hour tour.
I think it's really important that when people consume media, they understand that they are part of information warfare, and they need to look at things very carefully to what the framing is and what is being left out. Because I have to say, I didn't find that to be a particularly interesting conversation, even though it was really long. But it was important, I feel like, for us to lay out what was not said, because at some point it will matter. And I think within like the various guests that he has, like some of which are more or less polarizing, like everybody should understand that Andreessen is building the Web 3.0 open air prison. And the fact that he appeared on this show is significant. That Rogan would think that and not interrogate it.
Bye, Lynn. So Alison, do you want to just say any final words? Or I guess you kind of did, but
that was my thing.
That was pretty much
Thanks
it.
for joining in.
Yeah, thanks you guys for joining in, and yay, we made it through. We got to show some clips without getting shut down, I guess. Until next time, thanks again, Alison.